There is a moment in the first episode of Regular Show where Mordecai looks directly at Rigby and says something that, depending on when you watched it and where you lived, you may have never actually heard. The line is simple. It is crude. It is the kind of throwaway insult that two best friends toss at each other when one of them has done something catastrophically stupid. And yet that line, those few seconds of animation, became the opening salvo in one of the strangest and most fascinating censorship histories in the entire canon of American animated television. Because Regular Show did not get censored the way most cartoons get censored. It did not simply lose a word here or a scene there. It lost entire versions of itself. Whole readings of episodes were rewritten, reanimated, re-recorded. Characters' mouths were redrawn to match replacement dialogue. Scenes that aired once on a Monday night in September 2010 were pulled, altered, and never shown in their original form again. The version of Regular Show that most people know is, in a very real and very specific sense, not the version that was originally made. This is a video about every censored scene in Regular Show, but it is also about something larger than that. It is about what happens when a show is built on the razor edge between what a children's network will allow and what a group of wildly talented artists actually want to say. It is about the gap between the show that J.G. Quintel created and the show that Cartoon Network decided the world was allowed to see. And it is about the quiet, almost invisible ways that censorship reshapes a piece of art, not by destroying it, but by filing down its edges until the thing that remains is smoother, safer, and fundamentally different from what it was supposed to be. Welcome to Velvo. Get comfortable, settle in, turn the lights down low. And if you have not subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these. Let us get into it. To understand why Regular Show was censored so aggressively, you have to understand where it came from. And where it came from was not a children's television pitch meeting. It came from a student film about two gas station clerks who accidentally take acid. That is not an exaggeration. That is not a creative interpretation. J.G. Quintel, while attending the California Institute of the Arts, created a short film called 2 in the AM PM around 2006. The film screened at the Spike and Mike's Sick and Twisted Festival of Animation around 2007 and featured two convenience store employees working a Halloween night shift. One of them offers the other a piece of candy. The candy contains acid. What follows is a hallucinatory sequence in which the characters transform, the world around them melts and reshapes itself, and the entire short spirals into a psychedelic fever dream. The character designs in that short film, the vocal performances, the specific energy of two slackers trapped in a dead-end job while reality comes apart around them, all of it became the DNA of Regular Show. Quintel voiced one of the characters. Sam Marin voiced the other. When Cartoon Network picked up Regular Show through its Cartoonstitute development program, Quintel insisted that the same voices carry over. The Blue Jay who would become Mordecai kept the voice that had originally belonged to a gas station clerk on acid. The Gumball Machine who would become Benson kept the voice that had belonged to his coworker. The entire show, from its first frame to its last, is built on the skeleton of a drug trip. And Cartoon Network knew this. They had seen the short. They had greenlit the project with full knowledge of its origins. And in the beginning, they told Quintel to push. The network wanted TV PG content, and they wanted the show to ride the absolute ceiling of what that rating allowed. The first season was a dare. The network was daring Quintel and his team to go as far as they could. And they did. The Power is Season 1, Episode 1. It aired on September 6, 2010. And what most people do not realize is that the version of this episode that exists today is not the version that aired that night. The original broadcast contained dialogue that was subsequently removed, rewritten, and in some cases, physically reanimated so that the characters' lip movements would match the new, sanitized words. Think about what that means. The production team did not simply bleep a word or mute a line. They went back into the animation files and changed the way the characters' mouths moved. They created an entirely new version of the episode, frame by frame, so that no trace of the original dialogue would remain. The censored version was not laid on top of the original. The original was erased. The line that everyone remembers is the one Mordecai delivers early in the episode. How in the H are we gonna fix this S? In the original airing, the implication was unmistakable. The letters stood in for exactly the profanity you think they stood in for. and the comedic effect depended entirely on the audience understanding the substitution. But even that level of implication was eventually deemed too much. In later airings, the line was changed to, "How in the heck are we gonna fix this hole?" The UK version went even further, scrubbing out the letter substitutions entirely. Netflix UK carried yet another version, and newer reruns on Cartoon Network itself changed the line again to, "Now, how in the heck are we gonna fix this stuff?" One line of dialogue. 4 different versions across different platforms and different regions. And none of them are the line that J.G. Quintel originally wrote. But that was not the only change to the power. There is another line, one that gets discussed less often, but that reveals even more about the nature of the censorship. Mordecai, frustrated with Rigby, calls him a drill bit. The full original line was, "You drill bit, what else did you send?" And even in its original form, drill bit was already a substitution, a stand-in for a harsher word, filtered through the show's particular brand of absurdist euphemism. But over time, even that was trimmed. The line was cut down to simply, "What else did you send?" The insult was removed entirely, not because the word drill bit is offensive in any conventional sense, but because the energy of the delivery, the anger behind it, the implication that the word was standing in for something worse, all of that was deemed inappropriate for the audience that Cartoon Network was trying to protect. And then there is the line that vanished completely. "Do not look at our crotches while we synchronize our watches." This was a joke delivered during a musical sequence, a moment of physical comedy where the humor came from the absurd juxtaposition of the word crotches with the mundane act of synchronizing watches. It is, by any reasonable measure, a mild joke. It is the kind of line that would pass without comment in a PG-rated film. But on Cartoon Network, in a show aimed at a young audience, it was cut. Not altered, not softened, removed entirely, as though it had never existed. There is one more change to the power that deserves attention, because it illustrates the inconsistency that would define regular shows' censorship history. Rigby's line about attending a concert just for some lady pecs was cut from broadcasts. The phrase was removed. But then, according to fan documentation, sometime around late 2012, more than 2 years after the episode originally aired, the line was restored. It reappeared in broadcasts as though nothing had happened. It was also intact on the Season 1 Yuka DVD. The same line, in the same episode, was simultaneously too inappropriate for television and perfectly acceptable for a home video release. That contradiction is not a glitch in the system. It is the system. Censorship of this kind is not governed by a single, consistent standard. It is governed by a shifting set of anxieties that change with the cultural moment, the platform, the region, and the specific person reviewing the content on any given day. The power was not alone. 2 other Season 1 episodes, Free Cake and Meet Your Maker, underwent the same treatment. Free Cake is Season 1, Episode 5. It aired on October 4th, 2010. In the original version, Mordecai says, "No, Benson is gonna get pissed, so we should not." In later versions, pissed was changed to ticked. Meet Your Maker is Season 1, Episode 6. It also aired in October 2010. Mordecai's line, "You pissed me off," was changed to, "You ticked me off." In both cases, the animation was altered. The characters' mouths were redrawn to sync with the replacement words. The original versions of these 3 episodes, The Power, Free Cake, and Meet Your Maker, aired for a limited time during the show's first run and were never seen again in their uncut form. The official Blu-ray release contains the censored versions. The streaming versions contain the censored versions. The original versions exist now only in the memories of people who happened to be watching Cartoon Network on those specific nights in September 2010, and in scattered recordings that fans made before the changes were implemented. Sit with that for a moment. 3 episodes of a television show were broadcast, recalled, reanimated, and replaced. Not because they contained graphic violence or explicit sexual content. Not because they violated FCC regulations, but because a handful of words like pissed and crotches and drill bit, were spoken with the wrong kind of energy, in the wrong kind of show, at the wrong moment, in the network's evolving understanding of its own audience. The original versions of these episodes are, for all practical purposes, lost media. They exist in the same liminal space as unreleased album tracks and deleted film scenes. artifacts of creative intent that were overridden by institutional anxiety. This is how regular show's censorship story begins. Not with a single controversial moment, but with a systematic revision of the show's earliest episodes, a quiet rewriting of history that most viewers never noticed, and that the show itself never acknowledged. But the early season changes, as significant as they are, represent only the most visible layer of a much deeper pattern. Because the censorship of regular show was not limited to the United States. It was not limited to a few words or a handful of scenes. It was a global phenomenon, and as the show traveled from country to country, from platform to platform, it shed pieces of itself like a snake shedding skin. The version that aired in the UK was different from the version that aired in the US. The version that aired in Australia was different from both. The version that aired across Asia Pacific was different from all three. And in some countries, entire episodes were not censored at all. They were simply never shown. They were banned outright, erased from the schedule as though they had never been produced. The United Kingdom presents the most comprehensive and well-documented case of regular show censorship outside the United States. And what makes the UK edits so revealing is not their severity, but their specificity. The changes were not broad or blunt. They were surgical. Individual words were replaced. Individual shots were swapped. Individual moments of physical comedy were frozen, reframed, or removed with a precision that suggests someone watched every single frame of every single episode and made a deliberate decision about what British children could and could not see. The word crap was a consistent target. Whenever Mordecai says, "Oh crap, dude," in the American version, the UK version replaces crap with man. When Mordecai shouts, "Holy crap, it is real," in the episode Ello Governor, the UK version changes it to, "Oh man, dude, it is real." The word crap is not profanity by any meaningful standard. It is the kind of word that appears in children's books, in classroom conversations, in the dialogue of countless other animated shows. But in the context of regular show, it was deemed unacceptable. Not because of the word itself, but because of the way the characters said it, the energy, the frustration, the implication that these characters existed in a world where stronger language was always just below the surface, and crap was the lid barely holding it down. The word pissed received similar treatment across the UK broadcasts, consistently replaced with alternatives like ticked or ballistic. Benson is gonna get pissed became Benson is gonna go ballistic. The substitution changes the meaning in a subtle but important way. Pissed is visceral. It is immediate. It suggests an emotional state that is raw and uncontrolled. Ballistic is almost cartoonish by comparison. It turns Benson's anger into a performance rather than a genuine emotion. The censorship does not just remove a word, it removes a texture. But the most fascinating UK edits were not about language at all. They were about bodies. The UK censors were extraordinarily sensitive to any visual reference to the characters' physical forms, particularly anything below the waist. In Death Punchies, which is Season 1, Episode 4, a scene where Mordecai kicks Rigby in the crotch was removed entirely. It was not blurred or obscured. The shot was replaced with a different shot from earlier in the episode, one where Mordecai punches Rigby on the sofa. The physical comedy was preserved. The violent slapstick was maintained, but the specific target of the violence was changed. A kick to the crotch was unacceptable. A punch to the body was fine. The distinction tells you everything about what the UK censors were actually worried about. It was not violence. It was the acknowledgement that these animated characters had bodies with specific anatomical features. This pattern extended beyond individual shots. In episodes where Benson, the gumball machine, engages in any kind of rhythmic physical movement, the UK version frequently freezes the animation or substitutes a different angle. Close-ups of what the American version frames as crotch thrusting were changed to close-ups of foot tapping. The movement itself was altered, not commented on, not obscured, changed. The character's body was made to do something different than what the animators originally drew it doing. And the line, "Do not look at our crotches while we synchronize our watches," which was already cut from US reruns, was of course nowhere to be found in the UK version. The word turds was another consistent casualty. In the UK broadcasts, whenever a character calls someone a turd, the word is replaced with plank, Rigby's Body, Season 1, Episode 11, contains this substitution. My Mom, one of the show's most quotable episodes, also features it. Muscle Man calls someone a turd, and the UK audience hears plank. The replacement word is so specifically British, so perfectly calibrated to the sensibilities of UK broadcasting standards, that it almost feels like a different joke entirely. And in a sense, it is. The UK version of Regular Show is not the same show with different words. It is a different show that happens to share the same animation. There is something deeply strange about all of this, and it is worth pausing to name it directly. Regular Show is a cartoon about a blue jay and a raccoon who work in a park. The park is run by a gumball machine. Their co-workers include a yeti, a ghost with a hand growing out of his head, and a green man who makes "my mom" jokes. The show exists in a universe where death is a recurring character, where time travel is possible through a combination of keyboard shortcuts and existential dread, and where the consequences of slacking off at work include being transported to alternate dimensions, fighting sentient hot dogs, and accidentally summoning demons. In this universe, the word crap was too much. That is not a judgment on the censors. That is a statement about the gap between what the show was and what the institutions surrounding it believed it should be. The show existed in the space between childhood and adulthood, between innocence and experience, between the safe and the dangerous. The censors existed to patrol that border, and the history of Regular Show's censorship is the history of that border being drawn, redrawn, argued over, and ultimately revealed as arbitrary. The UK edits reveal something else, something that the show's creator J.G. Quintel himself has alluded to in interviews. The biggest concern was not language or sex. It was imitation. The UK censors were most aggressive in removing content that children might physically replicate. A kick to the crotch can be imitated. A punch can be imitated. A crude gesture can be imitated. The fear was not that children would hear a bad word and be corrupted. The fear was that children would see a funny action and copy it. This is why physical comedy was censored more heavily than dialogue, why body-related humor was treated more seriously than verbal profanity, and why certain episodes that contained no objectionable language whatsoever were still edited for their physical content. Think about what that means for a show like Regular Show, where physical comedy is not decoration, but structure. The show's humor is built on escalation. A small action leads to a slightly larger action, which leads to a catastrophic action, which leads to a supernatural event that destroys everything, and somehow resets by the next episode. The physical comedy is the engine that drives that escalation. When you remove or alter the physical comedy, you are not trimming the show's edges. You are reaching into its engine and removing parts. But the UK was, in many ways, gentle, compared to what happened across the Asia-Pacific region. Cartoon Network Asia-Pacific took a fundamentally different approach to Regular Show censorship. Where the UK made surgical edits, Asia-Pacific made wholesale removals. Where the UK replaced words, Asia-Pacific refused to air entire episodes. The result was a version of Regular Show that was not just edited, but incomplete. A show with holes in its narrative where episodes should have been. Brain Eraser is Season 2, Episode 10. It aired in the United States on February 25, 2011. The episode's premise is simple and, in the way that Regular Show specializes in, deceptively loaded. Mordecai accidentally walks in on Pops while Pops is naked. The image burns itself into Mordecai's brain. He cannot unsee it. The rest of the episode follows Mordecai and Rigby as they try to find a way to erase the image from Mordecai's memory. It is, on its surface, a comedy about embarrassment, about the specific mortification of seeing something you were not supposed to see and being unable to forget it. The nudity itself is handled with the kind of tasteful absurdity that Regular Show excels at. Pops is a lollipop-shaped man in a top hat. His nudity is inherently ridiculous rather than explicit. The American version, the UK version, and the Australian version all aired the episode without cuts. But Cartoon Network Asia Pacific refused to air it at all. Brain Eraser was banned from the Asia Pacific schedule entirely. The official reason cited was the high amount of sexual references and seizure references. The episode was deemed too inappropriate to be shown in any form, edited or otherwise. No amount of cutting or dubbing could make it acceptable. The entire premise, A character seeing another character naked and being haunted by the image was itself the problem. The Latin American broadcast took a middle path. The episode aired, but it was edited so heavily that it ran under 10 minutes. Pops's nudity was blurred, reframed, and replaced with alternate footage wherever possible. Shots were cropped to exclude the lower portion of the frame. Camera angles were adjusted. The episode that aired in Latin America was technically the same story, but it was told through a keyhole, with the audience allowed to see only the fragments that the censors deemed safe. This pattern repeated across the Asia-Pacific region with other episodes. Exit 9B, the Season 4 premiere, was refused airing due to what the network called high-intense violence. This is the episode that serves as a love letter to the show's own history, bringing back villains and callbacks from across the first 3 seasons in a massive battle sequence. It is one of the most ambitious episodes Regular Show ever produced, and in the Asia-Pacific market, it simply did not exist. It was eventually aired as a Halloween special, contextualized as seasonal content that could be framed as appropriately spooky rather than inappropriately violent. The episode did not change. The framing changed, and that was enough. The Unicorns Have Got to Go is Season 1, Episode 8. It aired on October 25, 2010. And it was banned in Poland, Romania, and Hungary. The reasons were never officially specified, but the episode contains what can most charitably be described as heavy gross-out humor with strong sexual undertones. The unicorns in the episode are not the majestic creatures of fantasy literature. They are crude, aggressive, and their behavior carries implications that hover uncomfortably close to explicit territory. There is a sequence involving what the show frames as lady flashbacks that, even in its broadcast form, pushes the boundaries of what a children's network would typically allow. The episode also features Skips crushing a can on his forehead in a way that was later cut from US reruns, though the precise timing of that cut suggests that the standards applied to the episode evolved even within the American market. In Russia, the censorship of Regular Show took on a political dimension that has nothing to do with crude humor or bodily functions. The Real Thomas is Season 6, Episode 8. It aired in the United States on November 20th, 2014. The episode reveals that Thomas, the park's intern, is actually a Russian spy. The premise is played for comedy. Thomas has been gathering intelligence on the park and its employees, and the revelation leads to an action sequence in which the Regular Show cast must deal with the fallout of having been infiltrated. In Russia, this episode was banned, not edited, not dubbed with altered dialogue, banned entirely. The premise of a Russian spy character, even in a cartoon about a blue jay and a raccoon, was considered offensive and, more importantly, poorly timed. Russia's ongoing geopolitical conflicts made the episode's premise feel less like comedy and more like commentary, and the network chose to remove it from the schedule rather than risk the implication. Other countries took a different approach to The Real Thomas. The UK, the Philippines, and Australia aired the episode but removed or altered the Russian references. Cartoon Network Asia went the furthest, replacing all mentions of Russia with a fictional country called Druzhnia. The Russian flag was redesigned to resemble Germany's flag with an additional stripe. The episode's special title card, which played on Russian imagery, was replaced with a standard Regular Show title card. Dialogue was redubbed. Visual elements were altered. The episode that aired across Asia was the same story with a different villain, the same plot with a different context, the same joke with a different target. The spy was no longer Russian. The geopolitical satire was no longer geopolitical. The episode became a story about a spy from a country that does not exist, infiltrating a park that exists in a universe where reality is already negotiable. But even the comprehensive changes to The Real Thomas did not stop at language and flags. The UK version and the complete series DVD also edited the episode's content beyond the nationality swap. A scene where Benson reacts to a female character producing handcuffs was altered. In the original, Benson sounds, as the censorship documentation delicately puts it, sexually excited before realizing he is being held hostage. In the edited version, Benson asks in fear, "Why does a schoolteacher need handcuffs?" A scene where Thomas chokeholds a man to death was changed to a non-fatal sleeper hold. A character smacking his own rear end after defeating the antagonists was changed to the character merely pointing at his rear end. Each change is small, each change is specific, and each change chips away at the texture of the episode, smoothing out the rough edges until what remains is a version of the story that is technically complete, but tonally flat. There is a version of regular show that exists only in the aggregate, a composite version assembled from all the different regional edits, all the different broadcast standards, all the different moments where someone in an office somewhere decided that a particular word or image or implication was too much for the audience they imagined watching. If you could somehow watch every version of every episode simultaneously, you would see a show that flickers, that shifts, that changes shape depending on who is watching and where they are watching from. The American version says, pissed. The UK version says, ticked. The Asia-Pacific version says nothing at all because the episode was never aired. The Russian version does not exist. The Latin American version exists but is missing 2 minutes of footage. The Australian version is mostly intact but was originally banned before being reinstated in a censored form. This is not how we usually think about television. We think of a show as a fixed object, a thing that was made, that exists, that can be watched. But regular show, more than almost any other animated series of its era, demonstrates that a television show is not one thing. It is many things, shaped by the institutions that distribute it, the standards that govern it, and the anxieties of the cultures that receive it. The show that J.G. Quintel made is not the show that the world watched. The world watched dozens of different versions, each one missing something, each one shaped by a different set of fears about what children should and should not see. And the most revealing thing about all of this is what the censorship focused on, not the violence. Regular show is, by any reasonable measure, an extraordinarily violent show. Characters die. They die frequently. They die in ways that are graphic, surprising, and sometimes genuinely disturbing. In Over the Top, Season 2, Episode 21, Skips accidentally kills Rigby during an arm wrestling match. Rigby dies, on screen, in a children's cartoon. Skips then arm wrestles Death himself to bring Rigby back to life. The UK version of this episode cut the hospital scene where Rigby is pronounced dead. It changed the line, "Well, he died," to, "Well, he is gone." But the fundamental plot, a character killing another character and then bargaining with the personification of death for the victim's resurrection, was preserved. The story remained. The death remained. Only the directness of the language around the death was softened. Think about the priorities that reveals. A character can die on screen. A character can be killed by another character on screen. But the word died must be replaced with gone. The event is acceptable. The accurate description of the event is not. The censorship is not protecting the audience from death. It is protecting the audience from the word for death. And that distinction, that gap between what is shown and what is said, between what is depicted and what is named, is the key to understanding everything about how regular show was censored and why. The show was never censored for being too violent, too dark, or too strange. It was censored for being too direct, for naming things that other cartoons left unnamed, for saying pissed when other shows would say angry, for saying died when other shows would say gone, for showing a kick to the crotch when other shows would show a punch to the arm, for putting a character naked on screen and letting another character be traumatized by it rather than treating it as an invisible, consequence-free joke. Regular show did not push boundaries by doing things that other shows did not do. It pushed boundaries by being honest about what it was doing. And honesty, as it turns out, is the thing that censors fear most. This is the pattern that runs through every censored scene in regular show, from the first episode to the last. The show tells the truth about its own content. The censors soften that truth into something more comfortable. And in the gap between the truth and the comfort, something essential is lost. Not the plot, not the story, not the characters, but the texture, the specificity, the feeling that this show, unlike so many of its peers, was willing to look at the messy, awkward, sometimes crude reality of being alive and say exactly what it saw. The Prank Callers episode, Season 1, Episode 9, which aired on November 1st, 2010, contains one of the most audacious pieces of implied adult content in the show's history. The master prank caller makes a joke that implies he has been sleeping with Mordecai's mother. The line, "Hurry up, your mom is like totally starving," carries a sexual implication that is impossible to miss if you are old enough to understand it, and easy to miss if you are not. That is the show's trick, its fundamental operating principle. Regular Show exists in the space between two audiences. Children watch it and see a funny cartoon about animals who get into trouble. Adults watch it and see the jokes that the children cannot see. The show does not hide its adult content. It layers it, placing it at a depth that only certain viewers can reach. And if you pause the episode at precisely the right moment, there is a detail that most people have never noticed. Near the bathroom floor in the master prank caller's apartment, there is a small object that appears for approximately 1/10 of a second. It looks, to those who notice it, like a condom wrapper. It disappears almost immediately. It may be intentional, it may be a coincidence of the animation, but its presence, even for a fraction of a second, suggests that the show's artists were embedding details at a level of specificity that no censor could reasonably be expected to catch. The censorship of Regular Show was always a race between the creator's ingenuity and the network's vigilance. And in moments like this one, the creators were winning. Peeps, Season 2, Episode 5, which aired on January 17, 2011, takes the show's body-related humor in a direction that is less crude and more genuinely unsettling. The episode features a giant eyeball creature named Peeps, who watches the park employees constantly. At one point, Peeps watches Pops in the shower. The scene is played for discomfort rather than comedy. The voyeuristic quality of the moment, the violation of privacy, the power imbalance between the watcher and the watched, all of it sits in a register that is closer to horror than humor. And yet the scene was not censored in most regions. The word crap was too much, but a giant eyeball watching a naked man in the shower was allowed to stand. Because the scene, while deeply uncomfortable, does not contain any specific word or image that triggers the censorship protocols. The discomfort is contextual. It emerges from the situation, not from any individual element within it. And censorship, as Regular Show's history demonstrates over and over again, is far better at catching individual elements than at reading context. Before we continue, if you are enjoying this, please consider subscribing. It helps us keep making these. Do Me a Solid, Season 2, Episode 18, which aired on May 2nd, 2011, is another episode that managed to air largely uncut, despite containing humor that is, on close inspection, remarkably suggestive. The episode's title itself is a double entendre that the show never acknowledges and never needs to acknowledge. The plot involves Rigby asking Mordecai to perform a series of increasingly embarrassing favors, and the escalation of those favors carries a subtext that the show rides without ever crossing into explicit territory. The UK version did not edit this episode. It passed through censorship review without changes, and that fact tells you something about the nature of the censorship regime. It was looking for specific triggers, specific words, specific images. It was not looking for tone. It was not looking for implication. It was not looking for the slow, careful way that Regular Show built its adult humor into the structure of its stories, rather than the surface of its dialogue. This is the paradox of Regular Show's censorship. The things that were caught and changed were almost always the least subversive elements of the show. A character says crap, and the word is replaced. A character kicks another character in the crotch, and the shot is swapped. A character says pissed, and the line is re-recorded. These are surface-level changes to surface-level content. Meanwhile, the show's deepest and most sophisticated adult humor, the structural jokes, the implied sexual content, the existential themes, the genuinely disturbing depictions of isolation and failure and regret, all of it passed through every censorship review in every country without a single alteration. The censors were catching the waves and missing the current. Weekend at Benson's, Season 3, Episode 12, which aired on January 16, 2012, provides a perfect illustration of this dynamic. The episode is a direct homage to the 1989 film Weekend at Bernie's, in which two employees must pretend their dead boss is still alive. In the Regular Show version, Benson is not dead but unconscious, incapacitated after consuming a supernaturally powerful concoction called the Mississippi Queen. The episode contains a musical sequence set to the mountain song Mississippi Queen, And during this sequence, the lyric, "She moves better on wine," is censored. The word wine is covered by the sound of screeching brakes. A single reference to alcohol in a song is obscured, while the entire premise of the episode, two employees dragging their unconscious boss's body around a party, manipulating his limbs to make him appear functional, and lying to everyone about his condition, is presented without comment. The premise is not censored. The word is. The behavior is acceptable. The substance is not. That is the whole story of regular show censorship, distilled into a single example. The show can depict two employees puppeting their boss's unconscious body through a social event. It can show the desperation, the deception, the barely concealed panic, but it cannot say the word wine. The image of exploitation is allowed. The name of the substance is not. The thing itself is fine. The word for the thing is dangerous. And this pattern did not soften as the show continued. If anything, it intensified. J.G. Quintel has spoken publicly about the network's shifting standards. In interviews, he described the first season as a period of freedom. Cartoon Network wanted TV PG content and encouraged the writers to push the rating to its limit. The network wanted regular show to be the edgy show on the block, the one that felt different from everything else in the lineup. And for those first 12 episodes, the writers took that mandate seriously. They wrote dialogue that sounded like actual conversation between 20-somethings. They included physical comedy that reflected the way real friends actually mess with each other. They built a show that felt lived in and authentic in a way that most animated comedies do not. But as the show's audience grew, as it became clear that regular show was attracting not just the older viewers the network had hoped for, but also younger children who were drawn to its colorful characters and energetic storytelling, the standards shifted. Quintel recalled Cartoon Network telling the team, in essence, that they needed to tone it down. The directive was not to change the show's identity. It was to sand down the specific elements that younger viewers might absorb or repeat. The pissed had to become ticked. The crap had to become man. The crotch kicks had to become body punches. The show was still allowed to be regular show. It was just not allowed to be the version of regular show that had earned it its audience in the first place. There is a specific kind of creative loss that comes from this kind of censorship, and it is not the obvious kind. The show did not become worse. The episodes that were produced under the stricter standards are, in many cases, among the show's best. Eggscellent, which won a Primetime Emmy Award, was produced under these tighter guidelines. So were dozens of other episodes that are remembered as classics. The censorship did not kill the show's creativity, but it did redirect it. The energy that had gone into crafting the perfect crude joke, the perfect implied profanity, the perfect physical gag that existed right on the line of acceptability, that energy was channeled into different kinds of storytelling. The show became more emotionally sophisticated as it became less verbally crude. It deepened its character work as it lost access to certain surface-level expressions of character. The censorship, in a perverse way, may have made regular show a better show, but it made it a different show, and the show it replaced, the one that existed for those first few weeks of broadcast in September 2010, the one with the original dialogue and the original animation and the original intent, that show is gone. The question that hangs over all of this, the question that regular show's censorship history keeps posing without ever quite answering, is, who was this show for? Because the answer to that question changed constantly, and it is the changing answer that explains the changing standards. When J.G. Quintel pitched regular show, when he walked into a room with his CalArts short film about gas station clerks on acid and said, essentially, I want to make a show based on this, the intended audience was clear. The show was for people like Quintel himself, young adults, people in their late teens and 20s who were old enough to recognize the references, old enough to catch the innuendo, old enough to appreciate the way the show used the tropes of children's animation as a delivery system for something far more sophisticated. The show was a Trojan horse. It looked like a children's cartoon. It behaved like an adult comedy wearing a costume. And for the first season, that identity held. The 12 episodes of Season 1 are the purest expression of Quintel's original vision. They are also the most censored episodes in the show's history, which is not a contradiction. They are the most censored because they are the most honest about what the show actually is. They contain the dialogue that sounds most like real speech. They contain the physical comedy that feels most like real interaction. They contain the references that point most directly toward the adult experiences that inspired them. And every single one of those qualities made them targets for revision once the network realized that the audience was not who they expected it to be. Because children watched regular show, of course they did. It aired on Cartoon Network. It featured colorful animal characters and supernatural adventures and a raccoon who yelled a lot. It was exactly the kind of show that a 7-year-old would stumble onto while flipping channels and immediately love. And once those 7-year-olds became a significant portion of the audience, the calculus changed. The show could no longer be a Trojan horse. The people inside the horse had been spotted. The disguise had to become the reality. This is what Quintel was responding to when he described the network telling them to tone it down. The instruction was not arbitrary. It was responsive. The audience had shifted, and the show had to shift with it. The censorship was not imposed from above by people who did not understand the show. It was imposed from above by people who understood the show perfectly and understood its audience even better. They knew that the show was doing something sophisticated with its layered humor. They also knew that sophisticated layering does not protect a network when a parent complains about their child repeating the word pissed at school. And so the show entered its middle period, seasons 2 through 5, operating under a set of constraints that were stricter than the first season but looser than what would come later. This was regular show's golden age, the period when the show produced its most beloved episodes, its most emotionally resonant arcs, and its most creative storytelling. It was also the period when the censorship became most visible, because the show was pushing against its new boundaries, with exactly the same energy it had used to push against its old ones. The writers were not deterred by the tighter standards. They were challenged by them. They found new ways to embed adult content, new ways to layer meaning, new ways to say the things they were no longer allowed to say. The "my mom" jokes are the perfect example. Muscle Man, the green, heavyset park employee voiced by Sam Marin, has a catchphrase that is simultaneously the most juvenile and the most structurally sophisticated recurring gag in the show. You know who else likes whatever is being discussed? My mom. The joke is technically clean. It contains no profanity, no innuendo, no physical comedy that could be imitated. It is, by every censorship standard in every country where regular show aired, completely acceptable. And yet the joke is, without exception, a "your mom" joke with the pronoun flipped. Every single instance of "my mom" is a setup for a punchline that exists only in the audience's understanding of the "your mom" joke format. A format that is inherently sexual, inherently crude, and inherently designed to provoke exactly the kind of reaction that the censors were trying to prevent. The joke is clean on the surface and filthy underneath, and because censorship operates on surfaces, it was never touched. That is regular show at its most brilliant. Not the moments that were censored, the moments that could not be censored because they operated at a level of structural sophistication that no censorship protocol was designed to address. The censors could catch pissed. They could not catch a joke format that transforms every innocent statement into a crude implication through the listener's own understanding. The show was not smuggling content past the censors. It was building content that the censors' tools could not detect. But not every piece of content was that elegantly disguised. And when the show's rougher edges collided with the stricter standards of international broadcasting, the results ranged from the merely absurd to the genuinely surreal. Australia presented a particularly interesting case. The country's Cartoon Network affiliate banned several episodes outright before later reinstating some of them in censored form. The reasons for the bans varied. One episode was pulled for bullying references. Another was banned for sexual references, but later aired in a censored version. A third was banned for showing blood and violence. A fourth was banned for horror and violence. The pattern suggests a censorship regime that was reactive rather than proactive, banning episodes after they triggered complaints or internal reviews rather than screening them systematically before broadcast. The result was a version of regular show that appeared and disappeared from the Australian schedule unpredictably, with episodes vanishing from rotation without announcement and occasionally reappearing months later in altered form. Cartoon Network Asia had its own set of prohibitions. An episode was banned for bullying references, but aired on Mother's Day, suggesting that the ban was contextual rather than absolute. that the content was acceptable in some cultural contexts, but not in the default broadcast environment. Another episode was banned for sexual references. Brain Eraser, as previously discussed, was banned entirely, and the language replacements were more extensive than in any other region. The words crap, piss, and turd were replaced with crud, tick, and plank across the board, creating a version of the show's dialogue that sounded like a translation into a parallel language where the emotional register of frustration and anger had been systematically lowered by 1 degree. And then there is the matter of what was not censored, because for every scene that was cut, altered, or banned, there are dozens of scenes that sailed through every censorship review in every country without a single change, despite containing content that is, on close inspection, far more provocative than anything that was removed. The prank callers episode was already mentioned, but consider also the broader implications of the show's treatment of death. Characters in regular show die constantly. They die in explosions. They die in supernatural confrontations. They die because they lost a bet, failed a challenge, or simply angered the wrong entity. Death is not a special event in regular show. It is a recurring feature. It is played for comedy, for drama, for horror, and for pathos, sometimes within the same episode. In one episode, a character dies and is brought back to life through a game of arm wrestling. In another, a character dies and his friends must literally travel to the afterlife to retrieve him. In the series finale, a beloved character dies permanently, sacrificing himself to save the universe, and the show treats his death with the gravity and permanence that it had spent 8 seasons earning. None of this was censored. Not in the United States, not in the UK, not in Australia, not in Asia Pacific. The word died was sometimes replaced with gone, but the deaths themselves, the depictions of characters ceasing to exist, of friends mourning, of the universe demonstrating its indifference to individual lives, all of that was allowed to stand. Because death, in the context of children's television, is considered a valid narrative tool. It teaches lessons. It creates stakes. It gives stories weight. But the word pissed teaches nothing. The word crap creates no stakes. A kick to the crotch gives no story weight. These things are just crude. And crudeness, unlike death, is not considered educational. That is the philosophical foundation of regular shows censorship, and it is the philosophical foundation of most children's television censorship worldwide. Content is judged not by its impact but by its category. Death is a valid category. Crude language is not. Violence is a valid category, within limits. Sexual implication is not, under any circumstances. The specific impact of a particular scene on a particular viewer is not part of the calculation. What matters is whether the content fits into a category that the standards board has pre-approved. And regular show, a show that deliberately blurred the categories, that mixed the crude with the profound, the juvenile with the sophisticated, the silly with the devastating, was uniquely vulnerable to a system that could only see in categories. This is why the censorship of regular show feels so arbitrary. It is not that the censors were incompetent. It is that the censors were using a tool designed for a different kind of show. They were using a checklist on a show that was designed to be uncategorizable. And the result is a censorship history that makes no sense as a coherent policy, but makes perfect sense as a record of institutional anxiety, a document of the specific moments when an institution looked at a piece of art and said, this specific thing, this is where I draw the line. Not because the line was logical, but because the institution needed to draw it somewhere. There is a scene in the regular show movie that encapsulates everything this video has been discussing. Regular Show, the movie, was released in 2015. It is a feature-length film that takes the show's characters and mythology and scales them up to cinematic proportions. And when the movie was released in the UK, it was censored. Not because of language this time, not because of crude humor, because of violence. The UK release of Regular Show the movie was edited to secure a PG classification. Violence was toned down. Action sequences were trimmed. The intensity of certain confrontations was reduced. And sexual dialogue was removed, though the specifics of what constituted sexual dialogue in a movie about a blue jay and a raccoon, saving the timeline from a time-traveling villain, were left to the discretion of the classification board. The American theatrical release, the Cartoon Network US broadcast, and the video releases were all uncensored. But the UK audience saw a different film, a softer film, a film that had been shaped, like the show before it, into something that fit the contours of a specific national anxiety about what young audiences should experience. And this is the thing that makes regular show's censorship story so endlessly fascinating. It is not a story about a show being suppressed. It is a story about a show being translated. Every act of censorship is an act of translation, a conversion of the show's original meaning into a form that a different audience, in a different cultural context, with a different set of assumptions about what art should do, can receive. The UK version of regular show is not a diminished version of the American show. It is a British version. It speaks in the vocabulary of British broadcasting standards. It observes the boundaries of British cultural anxiety. It is regular show as Britain would have made it, which is not regular show as J.G. Quintel made it, but which is, in its own way, a complete and internally consistent text. The same is true of every regional version. The Asia-Pacific version, with its banned episodes and replaced words, is regular show as the Asia-Pacific market would have made it. The Russian version, with its absent episodes and political sensitivities, is regular show as Russia would have made it. The Latin American version, with its blurred nudity and truncated episodes, is regular show as Latin America would have made it. None of these versions are the real show. All of them are. The real show is the sum of all its versions, the flickering composite of every edit and every original, every cut and every preservation, every word that was spoken and every word that was replaced. But there is a loss in that multiplicity, and it is a loss worth naming. The loss is not of content. The content exists somewhere, in some version, for some audience. The loss is of intention. J.G. Quintel made specific choices. He chose pissed instead of ticked. He chose to show a kick to the crotch instead of a punch to the arm. He chose to include the line about crotches and watches. He chose to have a character call another character a drill bit with exactly the energy that implied the real word behind it. Every one of those choices was deliberate. Every one of them served the show's tone, its rhythm, its identity. And every one of them was overridden by someone who was not the creator, who did not share the creator's vision, and who was operating under a set of institutional priorities that had nothing to do with making art and everything to do with managing risk. That is not a condemnation. Risk management is what institutions do. Networks have advertisers. Advertisers have concerns. Concerns shape programming. This is the reality of commercial television, and regular show existed within that reality from its first frame. Quintel knew he was making a show for Cartoon Network. He knew the constraints. He pushed against them, because pushing against constraints is what artists do. But he was not naive about the system he was working within. The censorship of regular show is not a story of an artist being silenced by a villain. It is a story of an artist and an institution engaged in a continuous, 7-year negotiation about the boundaries of acceptable expression, a negotiation in which both sides won sometimes and lost sometimes, and the show itself was the terrain on which the negotiation took place. But the fact that the negotiation was understandable does not make its results less significant. The version of regular show that most people know is the negotiated version. It is the version that emerged after the institution had its say. And there is another version, an earlier version, a version that existed before the negotiation began, that most people will never see. Those first 3 episodes, The Power, Free Cake, and Meet Your Maker, in their original, uncut forms, represent the clearest expression of what regular show was supposed to be before it became what it was allowed to be. They are the show's first draft, and like most first drafts, they contain an energy, a rawness, a directness that the polished final version can never quite recapture. The history of regular show's censorship is, in the end, a history of drafts. The show was drafted and redrafted, not by its creator, but by its distributors. Each region, each platform, each rerun created a new draft, each one slightly different from the last. And the show that exists today, the show that streams on various platforms and airs in reruns around the world, is not the first draft or the final draft. It is every draft at once, a palimpsest of creative intent and institutional revision, a text that has been written and rewritten so many times that the original is visible only as a shadow beneath the current version. And if you know where to look, you can still see that shadow. You can see it in the moments where the censored dialogue does not quite fit the emotional rhythm of the scene. You can see it in the replaced shots where the substitute animation has a slightly different energy than the surrounding frames. You can see it in the episodes that feel like they are building toward a joke that never arrives, because the joke was removed and nothing was put in its place. You can see it in the structural sophistication of the humor that survived, the "my mom" jokes, and the layered innuendos, and the single-frame Easter eggs, because that sophistication exists precisely because the simpler, more direct humor was taken away. The shadow of censorship is visible in the shape of what remains. Regular Show ran for 8 seasons and 261 episodes, from September 6, 2010 to January 16, 2017. It won a Primetime Emmy. It was nominated for multiple Annie Awards. It launched the career of one of the most distinctive creative voices in American animation. And across those 8 seasons, in countries around the world, on platforms from broadcast television to streaming services to DVD releases, it was censored hundreds of times. Words were changed. Scenes were cut. Episodes were banned. Entire versions of the show were created and destroyed. And through all of it, the show kept going. It kept telling its stories. It kept finding new ways to say the things it wanted to say. It kept pushing against the boundaries, even as the boundaries kept moving. There is a moment near the end of the series, in the finale, a regular epic final battle, which aired on January 16, 2017, where Pops, the innocent, childlike, lollipop-shaped man who has been a constant presence throughout the show's run, makes a choice. He chooses to sacrifice himself. He hugs his evil twin, Anti-Pops, with genuine love, and that love cancels out the negative energy, and they both cease to exist. The universe is saved, Pops is gone. And the show, in its final moments, does not comment on this. It does not add music to tell you how to feel. It lets the moment sit. It holds on the faces of the characters who loved him. It shows time passing. It shows them growing older. It shows them moving on. That scene was never censored. Not in any country. Not on any platform. Not in any version. Because there was nothing to censor. No crude word. No inappropriate image. No gesture that a child might imitate. Just a character choosing to die for the people he loves, and the people he loves learning to live without him. The most powerful moment in the show's history was also the most uncensorable, because the depth was not in the words or the images, it was in the meaning. And meaning, for all its power, has never been something that a censorship board knows how to cut. This is what Regular Show leaves behind. Not a single, definitive version of itself, but a constellation of versions, each one incomplete, each one shaped by the specific anxieties of the moment and place in which it was received. The show that J.G. Quintel made is not the show that the world watched, but the show that the world watched, in all its censored, edited, banned, and revised forms, is still Regular Show. It is still the story of 2 friends who work in a park and get into trouble. It is still the story of a gumball machine who yells, and a Yeti who knows more than he says, and a lollipop man who sees the best in everyone. It is still the story of what happens when ordinary life becomes extraordinary, when the mundane erupts into the supernatural, when the regular becomes the irregular, and the irregular becomes something transcendent. The censors changed the words. They did not change the show. And that, perhaps, is the most Regular Show thing of all. The show was always about the gap between what things look like on the surface and what they actually are underneath. 2 slackers who seem lazy but care deeply. A boss who seems angry but is terrified of failure. A Yeti who seems stoic but carries centuries of grief. A show that seems like a children's cartoon but is actually a meditation on friendship, mortality, and the passage of time. The censors saw the surface and changed it. The underneath remained untouched. And the underneath is where Regular Show always lived. The surface said ticked. The underneath said pissed. The surface showed a punch. The underneath showed a kick. The surface said gone. The underneath said died. And every person who watched Regular Show, in every country, on every platform, heard both. They heard the word that was spoken and the word that was meant. They saw the shot that was shown and the shot that was replaced. They understood the version they were given and sensed the version that was taken away. Because regular show trained its audience to listen for the layer beneath the layer, to look for the joke inside the joke, to understand that the surface is never the whole story. The censors changed the surface. The audience found the underneath anyway. That pattern, the pattern of surfaces being polished while depths remain untouched, plays out across every season of regular show in ways that become more sophisticated as the show matures. And nowhere is that sophistication more visible than in the show's treatment of its own characters' bodies, their desires, their physicality, and the censors' increasingly elaborate attempts to pretend that animated characters do not have physical lives. There is a scene in Fuzzy Dice, a late Season 3 episode, which aired on August 20th, 2012, that demonstrates this dynamic with almost surgical precision. The episode is a caper story, a heist narrative built around Mordecai and Rigby trying to win a pair of fuzzy dice at an arcade run by a gang of animatronic bears. The plot itself is pure regular show, a mundane desire escalated to absurd and dangerous proportions. But embedded within the episode is a line of dialogue that became one of the most frequently cited examples of the show's censorship in the UK. The line involves the phrase, "when the balls drop." In context, the characters are talking about an arcade game. The balls in question are literal objects within the game's mechanics, but the double entendre is unmistakable, and the show knows it. Mordecai and Rigby snicker after the line is delivered. Their reaction is the show's way of acknowledging the joke without committing to it, a wink at the audience that says, "Yes, we know what that sounds like, and yes, we meant it to sound that way." In the UK version, the entire exchange was cut. The line itself was removed. The snickering was removed. And the dialogue was replaced with a sanitized alternative. "The balls are dropping on my watch, which means it is time," became, "My watch is telling me it is time." The innuendo was excised. The character's reaction to the innuendo was excised. And the scene that remained was functional but flat, a plot beat without a personality. What makes this cut so revealing is not the content that was removed, but the content that was left in place. The same episode contains an extended sequence in which the characters are threatened, chased, and physically endangered by animatronic bears in a scenario that plays like a horror film. The violence is sustained and intense. Characters are grabbed, thrown, and cornered. The threat feels genuine in a way that most regular show threats do, which is to say that the show's animation and voice acting sell the danger even when the premise is absurd. None of that was touched. The bears could menace. The characters could fear for their safety. But two characters could not snicker at a line about balls dropping. The hierarchy of concern is clear. Physical danger is acceptable content for children. Sexual awareness is not. This same hierarchy appears in the show's handling of the Dawn episode, Season 1, Episode 10, which aired on November 8th, 2010. The episode introduces Rigby's brother Don, who is everything Rigby is not. Tall, confident, charismatic, and beloved by everyone who meets him. Don's signature gesture is his sugar, a combination of a hug and a pat on the back that he offers to everyone he meets. The episode's emotional core is Rigby's jealousy and insecurity, his inability to accept that his brother is naturally gifted in the social skills that Rigby so desperately lacks. In the UK version, the word freaking in Rigby's frustrated dialogue was changed to stupid. Freaking is not a profane word. It is a euphemism for a profane word, a stand-in that everyone recognizes and that derives its emotional force from the word it replaces. But even the euphemism was deemed too strong. The shadow of the profanity was as unacceptable as the profanity itself. Think about that for a second. The censors were not just removing bad words. They were removing words that sounded like bad words. They were removing the echo of profanity, the ghost of it, the implication that somewhere in the character's mind, the real word existed even if it was never spoken. The censorship was not operating on language. It was operating on the idea of language. It was policing not what was said, but what was almost said, what was hinted at, what was present only as an absence. This is the level of scrutiny that regular show operated under, and it is worth pausing to appreciate what the show's writers managed to accomplish within those constraints. Because the constraints did not stop them, the constraints became the challenge, and the solutions they found were often more creative, more subversive, and more lasting than the original content would have been. Consider the episode Rigby's Body, Season 1, Episode 11, which aired on November 15, 2010. The episode's premise is that Rigby's body, exhausted from years of junk food and neglect, literally separates from his consciousness and goes on strike. Rigby's body walks away. It leaves him. It decides, independently, that it has had enough of the way Rigby treats it and chooses to exist on its own terms. The episode is played for comedy, but the underlying metaphor is one of the most sophisticated the show ever deployed. The idea that a person's body can rebel against their consciousness, that the physical self has needs and limits that the mental self is ignoring, that the consequence of sustained self-neglect is a fundamental rupture between who you are and what you are. All of this is present in the episode's premise, and none of it was censored. No region removed the metaphor. No platform softened the implication. The word turds was changed to planks in the UK version, but the existential horror of a person's body walking away from them was left entirely intact. This is the paradox again. The small things are caught. The large things pass through. The word turds triggers the censorship protocol. The metaphor for self-destruction does not, and the result is a version of the episode that is slightly cleaner on the surface and exactly as disturbing underneath. The censors changed the texture. They did not change the meaning. The same dynamic plays out in Death Punchies, Season 1, Episode 4, which aired on September 27, 2010. The episode is about Mordecai and Rigby discovering the Death Punch, a fighting move of such devastating power that it can destroy anything it touches. The episode is, beneath its action comedy surface, a story about escalation, about how the desire to be powerful leads inevitably to consequences that cannot be controlled. Rigby becomes obsessed with the death punch. He uses it recklessly. He uses it on friends. He uses it on objects. He uses it until the power itself becomes the problem, until the thing he sought for its ability to solve problems becomes the source of new, worse problems. In the UK version, the line, "My pepperonis are roasting down here," was changed to, "My chest hairs are roasting down here." The original line is a crude reference to a specific body part. The replacement is a slightly less crude reference to a different body part. The change is minimal. The joke still lands. The meaning is preserved. But the specific word pepperonis, with its playful crudeness, its childish euphemism for something that the character does not want to name directly, that specificity is gone. And in its place is a word, chest hairs, that is more neutral, more generic, less revealing of the character's particular way of talking about his own body. That kind of specificity is what made Regular Show different from its contemporaries. The show's dialogue was not generic cartoon dialogue. It was specific. It sounded like the way specific people actually talk, with specific verbal tics, specific euphemisms, specific patterns of avoidance and indirection. When Rigby says pepperonis, he is not just making a crude joke. He is speaking in his own voice, using his own vocabulary, revealing his own relationship with his own body through the word he chooses to describe it. When the UK version replaces that with chest hairs, it is not just cleaning up a joke. It is replacing a character's voice with a committee's voice. The word chest hairs is nobody's word. It does not belong to Rigby. It does not reveal anything about him. It is a placeholder, a neutral term selected for its inability to offend, and in its neutrality, it erases a small piece of who Rigby is. Multiply that erasure across hundreds of similar edits, across 8 seasons of dialogue changes, and you begin to understand the cumulative effect of Regular Show's censorship. No single change is devastating. No single replacement fundamentally alters the show, but the aggregate effect is a smoothing of texture, a gradual replacement of specificity with generality, of personality with propriety, of the voice of the creator with the voice of the institution. The show that emerges is still good. It is still funny. It is still emotionally resonant, but it is less itself than it would have been if every word, every shot, every gesture had been allowed to stand as originally created. There is a version of this argument that says censorship does not matter because the core of the show survived. And that is true. The core survived. The characters survived. The stories survived. The themes survived. Regular Show remained Regular Show through every edit, every cut, every regional variation. But the argument that only the core matters is an argument that privileges story over style, meaning over expression, And it is precisely the wrong argument to make about a show like Regular Show, where the style is the meaning. The way Rigby says pepperonis is not separate from what Rigby means. The way Mordecai says pissed is not separate from how Mordecai feels. The specific words are the specific emotions. Change the words and you change the emotions, even if the plot remains the same. This is what literary critics mean when they talk about the relationship between form and content. In great art, you cannot separate what is said from how it is said. The how is the what. The form is the content. And censorship, which operates on form while claiming to leave content untouched, is always, inevitably, changing both. The censors believed they were changing words while preserving meaning. They were not. They were changing meaning while preserving plot. And plot, while important, is not the same as meaning. The show knew this. The writers knew this. And their awareness of it is visible in the increasingly sophisticated ways they embedded meaning in forms that could not be censored. The "my mom" jokes are one example. But there are others, woven throughout the show's 8 seasons, that demonstrate a creative team operating at the absolute peak of their ability to say one thing and mean another. There is a specific kind of joke that Regular Show perfected, and it exists in the space between what a character says and what a character does. Muscleman says "my mom," and the joke is technically clean. But Muscleman's delivery, his timing, his physical posture, the way he leans into the line with the energy of someone who knows exactly what he is implying, all of that subtext is carried by performance rather than text. And performance, unlike text, cannot be censored without re-recording the entire line. The censors could change a word. They could not change the way Sam Marin said the word. And so the subtext survived, embedded in the grain of the voice, in the rhythm of the delivery, in the physicality of the performance that the animation was drawn to match. This is Regular Show's great trick, its lasting legacy in the art of animated storytelling. The show demonstrated that the most powerful content is not the content that sits on the surface waiting to be caught. It is the content that lives in the performance, in the timing, in the gap between what is said and what is heard. The censors could change pissed to ticked. They could not change the anger in the voice that said it. They could change pepperonis to chest hairs. They could not change the self-consciousness in Rigby's delivery that made the original line funny. They could cut the snickering after the balls drop line. They could not cut the audience's understanding of why the snickering was there in the first place. There is another dimension to Regular Show's censorship that has received almost no attention, and it is perhaps the most interesting dimension of all. It is the censorship of emotional content. Not the explicit emotions, the anger and frustration and crude humor that the censors targeted directly, but the implicit emotions, the loneliness and regret and existential dread that the show explored through its characters' arcs, and that no censor ever touched because no censor knew how to categorize them. Mordecai's relationship arc is the clearest example. Across the first 6 seasons of Regular Show, Mordecai pursues, wins, loses, and ultimately fails at romantic love in a way that is more honest and more painful than almost any other animated show has attempted. His relationship with Margaret begins as a crush, deepens into a genuine connection, and ends when Margaret leaves for college in the Season 4 finale, Stake Me Amadeus, which aired on August 12, 2013. The breakup is devastating, not because it is dramatic or violent, but because it is ordinary. Margaret is accepted to college. She has to go. Mordecai cannot ask her to stay, and so they part, not with anger or betrayal, but with the quiet sadness of 2 people whose lives are moving in different directions. None of this was censored. No region removed the breakup. No platform softened the sadness. The show was allowed to depict, in full and without alteration, a character experiencing the kind of loss that leaves no visible wound, but changes everything about how he moves through the world. Mordecai after Margaret is a different character than Mordecai before Margaret. He is more cautious, more guarded, more aware of the possibility that the things he wants might not want him back. And the show explores this change with a patience and honesty that would be remarkable in a live-action drama, let alone a cartoon about a blue jay. After Margaret, Mordecai meets CJ. The relationship is different. CJ and Mordecai share interests: a video game, grilled cheese, music, laser tag, action film kind of compatibility that is more specific and more grounded than the idealized connection Mordecai had with Margaret. CJ is drawn with edges. She has a temper. She has insecurities. She reacts to perceived threats with a volatile intensity that the show does not excuse or romanticize. She is a fully realized character, not a prize to be won, and Mordecai's relationship with her is correspondingly more complex, more difficult, and ultimately more revealing of who Mordecai actually is. The relationship ends in Dumped at the Altar, the Season 6 finale, which aired on June 25, 2015. At Muscleman and Starla's wedding, the accumulated tensions between Mordecai, CJ, and the returning Margaret reach a breaking point. CJ returns the charm bracelet Mordecai gave her and walks away. Mordecai tells Rigby they are taking a break, and the show, once again, does not comment on this. It does not moralize. It does not tell the audience who was right and who was wrong. It simply shows a young man who has failed at love for the second time and is beginning to suspect that the failure is not circumstantial but fundamental, that there is something about the way he approaches relationships that ensures they will end. None of this was censored, not in any country, not on any platform. The word crap was too much for British children, but the depiction of a character recognizing his own pattern of romantic failure was fine. The word pissed was too strong for Asian audiences, but the emotional devastation of being left at a wedding, of watching the person you care about walk away because you were not brave enough or honest enough to be what they needed, that was acceptable everywhere. The censors had no category for heartbreak. They had no protocol for existential loneliness. They had no trigger word for the slow, accumulating realization that you might not be good enough for the things you want. And so the deepest content of regular show passed through every censorship review untouched. The crude language was caught and cleaned. The physical comedy was caught and softened. The innuendo was caught and removed. But the sadness, the isolation, the quiet desperation of characters who are trapped in jobs they do not love, pursuing dreams they cannot reach, loving people who cannot love them back, all of that was invisible to the censorship apparatus. Censors were liddings, not because it was hidden. It was right there on the surface, in every frame, in every performance. But the censors were not looking for it. They were looking for words. They were looking for body parts. They were looking for gestures that children might imitate. They were not looking for feelings that children might absorb. And feelings, as it turns out, are far more powerful than words. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe goes a long way. Think about the children who watched regular show. Think about what they absorbed. Not the word pissed, which was removed. Not the kick to the crotch, which was replaced. Not the innuendo about balls dropping, which was cut. What they absorbed was the emotional content. They absorbed Mordecai's longing. They absorbed Rigby's insecurity. They absorbed Benson's frustration. The kind of frustration that comes from caring deeply about something that nobody else takes seriously. They absorbed Muscleman's journey from abrasive bully to devoted husband. They absorbed Pops's innocence and its eventual, heartbreaking sacrifice. They absorbed the show's fundamental message, which is that ordinary life is extraordinary, that the mundane contains the transcendent, that the regular is anything but. The censors protected those children from the word turd. They did not protect them from the truth. And the truth, delivered through 8 seasons of stories about friendship and failure and the terrifying beauty of being alive, is what those children will carry with them long after they have forgotten whether the line was pissed or ticked. There is a scene in Think Positive, Season 3, Episode 14, which aired on January 30th, 2012, that illustrates this point with devastating clarity. The episode's premise is that Pops, disturbed by Benson's constant yelling, issues an ultimatum. Benson must stop yelling at his employees, or he will be fired. Benson agrees. He holds his anger in. He swallows every frustration, every disappointment, every legitimate grievance he has against the 2 employees who consistently fail to do their jobs. And the anger, having no outlet, begins to transform him. Literally. The suppressed rage builds inside Benson's body until he becomes a giant, electrified fireball, a physical manifestation of everything he has been forced to swallow, a walking explosion of unexpressed emotion. The show is not being subtle about what it is doing here. This is not a metaphor buried deep beneath layers of meaning. This is the show's thesis. stated plainly, in the form of a gumball machine who is turning into a fireball because he was told he was not allowed to express himself. The lesson is clear. Suppression does not eliminate the thing being suppressed. It transforms it into something worse. The anger does not disappear when Benson stops yelling. It becomes a weapon of mass destruction. The emotion does not cease to exist when it is forbidden from being expressed. It finds another form, a more dangerous form, a form that cannot be controlled. And the show is telling you something about censorship with this episode, whether it intends to or not, because the censorship of regular show operates on exactly the same principle. The crude language is suppressed, the innuendo is removed, the physical comedy is softened, but the energy behind all of that content, the irreverence, the rawness, the willingness to name things that other shows leave unnamed, does not disappear. It transforms. It finds new forms. It embeds itself in structures that the censors cannot detect, and it emerges, more powerful for having been compressed, in the performances and the metaphors and the emotional arcs that pass through every censorship review without a scratch. Benson's Fireball is regular show's censorship, made visible. The show was told to stop expressing itself in certain ways, and the unexpressed energy did not vanish. It became something else, something the institution could not anticipate and could not control. The episode, predictably, was not censored for its thematic content. The metaphor about the dangers of emotional suppression was allowed to stand, but in the UK version, specific instances of Benson's dialogue were likely softened, consistent with the broader pattern of replacing strong language with neutral alternatives. The lesson about suppression was preserved. The specific expressions of what was being suppressed were altered. The irony writes itself. This brings us to the show's relationship with death, which is simultaneously its most censored and its least censored subject. Regular show depicts death more frequently and more directly than almost any other children's animated show of its era. Characters die in nearly every episode. Sometimes they die permanently. Sometimes they are resurrected through supernatural means. Sometimes they die and the show simply moves on, treating death as a natural and unremarkable feature of the universe it has created. Over the Top, Season 2, Episode 22, which aired on May 23, 2011, is the most direct engagement with death in the show's first 2 seasons. Skips, the immortal Yeti who serves as the park's handyman and de facto sage, kills Rigby. This is not a metaphor. It is not a dream sequence. It is not a fake-out. Skips and Rigby arm wrestle, and Skips, who possesses supernatural strength, accidentally kills Rigby. Rigby dies. His friends stand around his body. The show holds on their faces. The grief is real. The loss is real. The death is real. And then Skips arm wrestles death himself, the literal personification of death, a character who appears throughout the series as a recurring figure, and wins Rigby's life back. The episode resolves happily. Rigby returns. The status quo is restored. But the death itself, the moment of Rigby's death, is treated with a seriousness that the show's comedy framing cannot entirely contain. Skips did not mean to kill Rigby, but he did, and the show does not let him forget it. The guilt is visible in Skips's face. The fear is visible in the other characters' reactions. The message is clear. Power, even benign power, even power wielded by a good person for good reasons, can kill. The UK version cut the hospital scene. The opening of the episode, in which Benson, Mordecai, Pops, and Skips stand in a hospital as Rigby is pronounced dead, was removed entirely. The line, "Well, he died," was changed to, "Well, he is gone." The death was acknowledged but not named. The event was depicted but not described. The show was allowed to show a character dying, but not allowed to use the word died to describe what happened. The image was acceptable. The language was not. This is, if you think about it, an extraordinary statement about what censorship believes children can handle. Children can see death. They cannot hear the word for it. They can witness a character cease to exist. They cannot be told, in plain language, that what they witnessed was death. The assumption is that children process images differently than they process language, that seeing something is less damaging than hearing it named. And perhaps that assumption contains a grain of truth. Perhaps there is something about the act of naming that makes a concept more real, more permanent. more available for the kind of cognitive processing that transforms a fictional event into a source of genuine distress. But the assumption also reveals a deep discomfort with directness, a preference for euphemism over honesty, for the soft word over the true one. Regular Show, in its uncensored form, chose the true word. The censors chose the soft one. And the gap between died and gone is the gap that this entire video has been exploring. The gap between what the show said and what the world allowed it to say. Between the artist's intent and the institution's comfort. Between the truth and the version of the truth that was deemed safe enough for consumption. The Latin American experience of regular show censorship deserves its own extended examination, because it reveals a dimension of the censorship process that is not visible in the US or UK edits. In the United States and the United Kingdom, the censorship was primarily textual. Words were changed, shots were replaced, scenes were trimmed. The visual style of the show, its animation, its pacing, its composition, was largely preserved. The changes were layered on top of the existing product, altering specific elements while leaving the overall aesthetic intact. In Latin America, the changes went deeper. They affected not just what was said or shown, but how the show was experienced as a visual and temporal object. The Brain Eraser episode, which aired uncensored in the United States, the UK, and Australia, was so heavily edited for the Latin American market that it ran under 10 minutes. An episode designed to fill an 11-minute time slot was cut to less than 10 minutes. Think about what that means in practical terms. Nearly 2 minutes of content, roughly 18% of the episode, was removed. Not individual words, not individual shots, entire sequences. The episode that aired in Latin America was not the same episode with different dialogue. It was a different episode, a shorter episode. An episode with holes in its narrative, where scenes used to be. The techniques used to achieve this reduction were themselves remarkable. Pops's nudity was obscured through a combination of blurring, reframing, alternate footage, and cropping. Shots were zoomed in to exclude the lower portion of the frame. Camera angles that showed Pops below the waist were replaced with camera angles that showed him from above. The result was an episode in which Mordecai's distress at having seen Pops naked was present, but the thing that caused the distress was invisible. The effect was its own kind of surreal comedy, though not the kind the show intended. The audience watched a character react with horror and embarrassment to something the audience itself was not allowed to see. The premise of the episode, the central narrative engine, was the one thing that could not be shown. And then, after the negative reception of the heavily edited version, the episode was re-aired uncut. The censorship was reversed. The episode that had been deemed too inappropriate for broadcast was broadcast again, in its original form, as though the previous edit had never happened. This is perhaps the most striking example of the inconsistency that characterizes regular shows' censorship history. The same content, in the same market, was simultaneously too inappropriate and perfectly fine, depending on when it aired and who was making the decision. The standard was not fixed. It was floating. It moved with the cultural moment, with audience reaction, with institutional confidence. And regular show was caught in its wake, reshaped and then restored, censored and then uncensored. A show that was always becoming a different version of itself. The Latin American market also provides one of the few examples of censorship being applied not to the content of an episode, but to the identity of a character. In certain Latin American broadcasts, the handling of Muscleman's physicality was altered. Muscleman is, by design, a grotesque character. He is overweight, sweaty, prone to removing his shirt at inappropriate moments, and drawn with a deliberate emphasis on the physical discomfort his appearance causes other characters. His body is a source of comedy, of horror, and occasionally of genuine pathos, because beneath the gross-out humor is a character who is deeply insecure about his appearance and who uses humor as a shield against the judgment he anticipates from others. The Latin American edits to Muscleman's scenes were subtle but consistent. Moments where his body was the focus of physical comedy were trimmed. Shots that emphasized his sweat, his belly, his general physical excess were shortened or reframed. The effect was not to remove Muscleman from the show, but to domesticate him, to reduce the visual intensity of his physicality until he became a character who was merely large rather than aggressively, uncomfortably, deliberately grotesque. And in that domestication, something important was lost. Because Muscle Man's grotesqueness is the point. It is what makes his emotional journey meaningful. His transformation from the park's most repulsive employee to a devoted husband and eventual father only works because the show never lets the audience forget how difficult it would be to love him. The gross-out humor is not separate from the character development. It is the foundation on which the character development is built. Without the full, unedited physicality of Muscle Man's body, his love story with Starla loses a dimension. It becomes sweet but not earned, charming but not surprising. The version of Muscle Man that the Latin American audience saw was easier to love than the version J.G. Quintel created. And that ease is itself a kind of loss. This is the thread that connects every regional variation, every platform-specific edit, every country-by-country alteration. Each one makes the show easier to watch, easier to absorb, easier to present to a young audience without anxiety. And ease, in the context of art, is not always a virtue. Regular Show was designed to be slightly uncomfortable. It was designed to make you laugh and then make you wonder whether you should have laughed. It was designed to present crude humor and then reveal the genuine emotion underneath, to force the audience to reckon with the fact that the same character who makes fart jokes also cries at his wedding, that the same show that says pissed also says I love you, with a sincerity that most dramas cannot match. The discomfort is the bridge between the comedy and the truth. Remove the discomfort and the bridge collapses. The comedy remains on one side, the truth remains on the other. And the audience never makes the crossing that the show was designed to facilitate. The space arc of seasons 7 and 8 represents the final evolution of Regular Show's relationship with censorship. Beginning with Dumptown, USA, the season 7 premiere, which aired on June 26, 2015, the show gradually shifts from its park-based setting to a cosmic narrative that culminates in the series finale, a regular epic final battle, which aired on January 16, 2017. The space arc is, in many ways, the least censored stretch of the show's run. By the time Regular Show reached its 7th and 8th seasons, the censorship standards had stabilized. The network and the show had reached an understanding. The creators knew what they could and could not include. The network knew what it would and would not accept. The negotiation that had defined the show's first 3 seasons was over. Both sides knew the rules. And within those rules, the show found a new kind of freedom. The space arc is darker, more serialized, and more thematically ambitious than anything the show had previously attempted. It deals with fate, with destiny, with the possibility that the universe itself has a narrative structure that determines the outcomes of individual lives. Pops, the show's most innocent character, is revealed to be a cosmic figure, a being of enormous power whose destiny is to face and defeat his evil twin, Anti-Pops, in a battle that will determine the fate of the universe. The revelation transforms the show from a workplace comedy into an epic, and it transforms Pops from a comic relief character into a tragic hero. None of this was censored, not the violence of the cosmic battles, not the existential weight of the themes, not the death of Pops in the finale, which is presented as permanent and irreversible. Pops hugs Anti-Pops with genuine love. The love cancels out the evil, and both of them cease to exist. The universe is saved, but the price is the life of the show's kindest character. The show holds on the moment. It lets the audience sit with it. It shows the other characters grieving. It shows time passing. It shows them growing older, having families, living the lives that Pops' sacrifice made possible. The finale was not censored in any country. Not in the UK, where crap was always replaced with man. Not in Asia Pacific, where entire episodes had been banned. Not in Russia, where a spy episode had been pulled from the schedule. Not in Latin America, where nudity had been blurred and episodes had been cut to under 10 minutes. When it came to the moment that mattered most, the moment that would define the show's legacy, every censorship board in the world stepped back and let the show speak for itself. Because there was nothing to catch. No crude word, no inappropriate image, no gesture that a child might imitate. Just a lollipop man hugging his brother and choosing to die so that the people he loves can live. That is the scene that tells you everything about what censorship can and cannot do. It can change pissed to ticked. It can replace a crotch kick with a body punch. It can blur nudity and ban episodes and rename countries. But it cannot touch the meaning that lives beneath all of those surfaces. It cannot touch the love that drives a character to sacrifice himself. It cannot touch the grief of the friends who watch him go. It cannot touch the truth that regular show spent 8 seasons building toward, brick by brick, joke by joke, censored scene by censored scene. The surface is where the censors work. The underneath is where the show lives. And the underneath, from the first episode to the last, was never touched. There is one more thread to follow, and it is the thread that ties everything together. It is the thread of the show's own awareness of what was happening to it. Because regular show did not exist passively within the censorship regime. It did not simply accept the edits and move on. It responded. It adapted. It incorporated the fact of its own censorship into the fabric of its storytelling. Not explicitly, not in a way that any censor would recognize as commentary, but structurally, in the way the show built its narratives and the themes it chose to explore. Think about the recurring structure of a regular show episode. The basic template is this. Mordecai and Rigby want to do something. They are told not to do it. They do it anyway. Consequences ensue. The consequences escalate beyond all reason. A supernatural force intervenes. The day is saved, but only barely, and usually at the cost of significant destruction. This template appears in some form in the vast majority of the show's 261 episodes. And it is, if you look at it from a certain angle, a story about censorship. Mordecai and Rigby want to express themselves. They want to say what they want, do what they want, be who they want. An authority figure, usually Benson, tells them that their expression is unacceptable. It is too loud, too crude, too disruptive, too inconsistent with the way things are supposed to be done. Mordecai and Rigby ignore the restriction. They express themselves anyway. And the expression, freed from the constraints that were supposed to contain it, escalates until it becomes something uncontrollable, something that threatens to destroy the very world in which it exists. That is not just the structure of a regular show episode. That is the structure of the show's relationship with its own network. The creators wanted to express themselves. The network told them to tone it down. The creators found ways to express themselves anyway, through structural humor and layered innuendo and performances that carried the subtext the dialogue could not. And the expression, freed from the literal words that had been censored, became something more powerful and more lasting than the original content would have been. The censorship did not contain the show's energy, it redirected it. And the redirected energy found new channels, new forms, new ways of reaching the audience that were, in many cases, more effective than the direct expression that had been forbidden. This is why regular show endures, not because of the crude jokes that were censored, not because of the innuendo that was removed, not because of the words that were replaced. Regular show endures because of the thing that could not be censored, the essential quality that lived beneath every surface change, the irreducible core of the show that survived every edit, every cut, every ban, every regional variation. That core is the show's commitment to emotional truth. Regular show is, beneath every layer of crude humor and supernatural escalation and institutional anxiety, a show about what it feels like to be alive, what it feels like to work a job you do not love, what it feels like to want something you cannot have, what it feels like to grow up, to grow older, to realize that the future you imagined is not the future you are going to get, what it feels like to love someone who does not love you back, or who loves you but cannot stay, or who stays but is not who you need them to be. What it feels like to fail and try again, and fail again, and keep trying, not because you believe you will succeed, but because trying is all you know how to do. The censors changed the words. They changed pissed to ticked, and crap to man, and died to gone, and pepperonis to chest hairs, and turds to planks. They changed the shots. They replaced crotch kicks with body punches, and crotch thrusts with foot taps. They changed the episodes. They banned Brain Eraser, and Exit 9B, and The Unicorns Have Got to Go, and The Real Thomas. They changed the countries. They renamed Russia to Druzhnia, and redesigned flags and redubbed dialogue. They changed everything they could see, but they could not see the core. They could not see the thing that made regular show regular show. And that thing, that commitment to telling the truth about how it feels to be alive, carried the show through 8 seasons and 261 episodes, and censorship reviews in dozens of countries, and versions upon versions upon versions, each one slightly different, each one slightly softer, each one slightly more comfortable than the one J.G. Quintel originally made. And the audience heard it anyway. Through every version, through every edit, through every substituted word and replaced shot and banned episode, the audience heard the truth that the show was telling. Because the truth was never in the words. It was in the space between the words. And that space, the space between what was said and what was meant, between what was shown and what was felt, between what was censored and what survived, that space is where regular show lives. That space is where it has always lived. And that space is uncensorable. There is a moment in the series finale where the camera pulls back from the park for the last time. The characters are older. They have lived entire lives. They have married, had children, built careers, lost friends, found new ones. The park is smaller now, seen from a distance, a green rectangle in a larger world. And the show holds on that image, that small green space where everything happened, where two friends worked and fought and laughed and failed and grew up, and it lets the image speak for itself. No narration, no commentary, no final joke, just the park, just the place where the show lived, just the silence. The silence was never censored. The silence was always the point. Every censored scene in regular show is a sentence in a longer story. A story about an animated show that was too honest for the institutions that distributed it. A story about creators who refused to let censorship define their work. A story about an audience that heard what was meant, not just what was said. A story about the gap between the surface and the underneath, and about what lives in that gap, and about why what lives in that gap is the thing that matters most. The surface changes, the underneath endures. That is the lesson of every censored regular show scene. That is the lesson of regular show itself. And that is the lesson that every person who has ever been told to tone it down, to be less direct, to smooth their edges, to replace their strongest words with softer ones, carries with them whether they have seen the show or not. The show said what it meant. The world said, "Not like that." And the show said, "Fine, I will say it another way." And it did. But before we get to the end of this story, there are individual episodes and individual moments that deserve closer attention. Because the censorship of regular show was not just a systemic phenomenon. It was also a series of individual decisions, each one made about a specific scene by a specific person for a specific reason. And some of those decisions reveal more about the nature of censorship than any systemic analysis could. Eggscellent is Season 3, Episode 17. It aired on February 27, 2012, and it is, by almost any measure, the finest episode regular show ever produced. It won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Short-Format Animated Program. It has a 9.6 rating on IMDb, one of the highest-rated individual episodes of any animated series. And it was produced under the tighter censorship standards that Cartoon Network imposed after the first season, which means that the greatest episode of regular show, the one that earned the show its most prestigious award, was made within constraints that the show's creator had not chosen and did not want. The episode begins with a television commercial for an eating challenge at a restaurant. Finish the omelet in 1 hour and you win a hat that says, "I'm Eggscellent." Rigby becomes obsessed with the hat. Not the challenge, not the omelet, the hat, the prize. The tangible proof that he accomplished something. And that obsession, that desperate need for validation through a meaningless achievement, is one of the most painfully accurate depictions of Rigby's character in the entire series. Rigby does not want to eat the omelet. He does not care about food. He cares about the hat, because the hat is evidence that he did something worth doing. And Rigby, who has spent his entire life being told that he is not good enough, needs that evidence more than he needs anything else. But Rigby is allergic to eggs. The show reveals this with the kind of casual brutality that it specializes in. Rigby attempts the challenge. He begins eating, and then he has a severe allergic reaction and falls into a coma. He is taken to the hospital. He is unconscious. And Mordecai, standing at his friend's bedside, makes a promise. He will finish the challenge himself. He will win the hat. He will bring it to Rigby. What follows is a training montage, a study sequence, and an emotional climax that would be impressive in any genre but is extraordinary in an 11-minute animated comedy. Skips tells Mordecai about a man named Jonathan Kimball who once worked at the park and who spent years trying to complete the same challenge, documenting every advantage he found in a notebook. Benson, who has spent the entire series yelling at Mordecai for being lazy and irresponsible, encourages him. The encouragement is not dramatic. It is not a speech. Benson simply tells Mordecai that he can do this. And that simple statement of faith, coming from the character who has expressed the least faith in Mordecai across 2.5 seasons, carries more emotional weight than any dramatic monologue could. Mordecai completes the challenge. He wins the hat. He brings it to Rigby, and the episode ends with Rigby, still in his hospital bed, wearing a hat that says, "I'm Eggscellent." The hat means nothing. The gesture means everything. This episode was not censored in any meaningful way. Not in the US, not in the UK, not in any region. And the reason it was not censored is the reason it is the show's finest episode. It contains nothing that triggers censorship protocols. No crude language, no sexual innuendo, no physical comedy that children might imitate, no reference to bodies or substances, or anything that falls outside the approved categories of children's television content. It is, on its surface, exactly the kind of episode that the censors wanted regular show to make. Clean, emotional, appropriate, safe, and it is devastating. It is an episode about a character who will literally risk death for a hat because the hat represents the validation he has never received from the people around him. It is an episode about a friend who will train his body to the point of physical agony to win a meaningless prize for another friend, because winning it is the only way he can say, "You matter to me." It is an episode about the gap between what things mean to the outside world and what they mean to the people who need them. The hat means nothing, but Rigby needs it, and Mordecai understands why Rigby needs it. And that understanding, that recognition that the people we love have needs that do not make sense to anyone else, is the emotional core of the show, and it passed through every censorship review in every country without a single change. Think about what that tells you. The show's most powerful episode contained 0 censored content, 0 crude jokes, 0 innuendo, 0 body humor. The restrictions that Cartoon Network imposed on regular show did not prevent the show from reaching its creative peak. They may have, in some indirect and unquantifiable way, contributed to it, because the writers, deprived of their crudest tools, were forced to find emotional truth through other means. They were forced to write Eggscellent without pissed or crap or crotch kicks, and what they wrote instead was something that won an Emmy. This is not an argument for censorship. Censorship does not make art better, but the creative response to censorship, the refusal to accept that the loss of certain tools means the loss of certain capabilities, that response can produce art that transcends the conditions of its creation. Eggscellent is proof. It is proof that regular show's genius was never in the crude jokes. The crude jokes were fun. They were funny. They were part of the show's identity. But they were not the source of its power. The source of its power was always the emotional truth beneath the humor. And that truth did not need the word pissed to make itself felt. It needed Mordecai standing at Rigby's hospital bed, making a promise he did not have to make, and then keeping it. If this has been keeping you company, subscribing is the best way to help us make more of these. Skips's backstory provides another lens through which to examine the relationship between what regular show was allowed to show and what it chose to show. Skips's story, Season 5, Episode 22, which aired on April 14, 2014, reveals that Skips, the immortal Yeti, was not always Skips. He was once Walks. He was young. He was in love with a woman named Mona, and Mona died. She was crushed by falling debris. And Walks, shattered by grief, was offered immortality by the guardians of eternal youth, not as a reward, but as a burden. He would live forever, not because he wanted to, but because he was the only one who could defeat Clorgbane the Destroyer, a being who returns every 157 years. When asked what he wanted to be called, the young man who had been Walks, the young man who had just lost the only person he loved, simply said, "Skips." He changed his name because the name Walks reminded him of her. He chose to skip instead of walk because walking was what he did when she was alive, and she was gone, and he did not want to be reminded. Every time Skips moves across the screen, every time his feet leave the ground in that distinctive, rhythmic skip, he is performing an act of grief. He is demonstrating, in the most literal way possible, that losing someone can change, not just how you feel, but how you move through the world. None of this was censored. In no country, on no platform, in no version of the show was this backstory altered or softened. The show was allowed to tell a story about eternal grief. It was allowed to show a character who has lived for centuries carrying the weight of a loss that never heals. It was allowed to depict the specific, physical way that grief changes a person, turning a walk into a skip, turning a name into a memorial, turning an immortal life into an immortal sentence. The word died was too strong for UK broadcasts, but the depiction of a character who has been grieving for centuries was fine. The image of death was censored, the experience of death was not. And Skips's story resonates even more powerfully when you consider what it means in the context of the show's censorship history. Skips is a character who has been altered. He is not who he was meant to be. He was meant to be Walks. He was meant to live a mortal life with Mona. He was meant to grow old and die in the natural way, the way that all living things grow old and die. But the Guardians intervened. They changed him. They made him into something different from what he was supposed to be. And the version of him that exists now, the version called Skips, is not worse than the version called Walks. He is wise. He is strong. He is essential to the people around him. But he is not who he was meant to be. He is who the institution that granted his immortality needed him to be. And the gap between who he is and who he was meant to be is the source of all his sadness. That is regular show. Not Skip specifically, but the show itself. Regular show is not who it was meant to be. It is not the show that J.G. Quintel originally created. It is the show that the institution that distributed it needed it to be. And the version of the show that exists now, the censored version, the edited version, the version with ticked instead of pissed, and planks instead of turds, and gone instead of died, that version is not worse than the original. In many ways, it is better, but it is not the original. And the gap between what it is and what it was meant to be is the source of something that is not quite sadness, but is something close to it. A wistfulness, a sense that something was lost, not destroyed, not ruined, just lost, just altered, just skipped over, the way Skips skips over the ground where he used to walk. The show itself became Skips. It changed its name. It changed its movement. It changed because something was taken from it. And the response to that loss was not to stop, but to find a different way of being. And the different way of being, like Skips himself, is noble and impressive, and occasionally heartbreaking in the things it reveals about what was lost. There is something worth examining in the way the show handles the karaoke video episode, Season 2, Episode 28, which aired on August 1st, 2011, as the Season 2 finale. The plot is straightforward. Mordecai and Rigby discover that they recorded a karaoke video in which they insult all of their co-workers. Benson announces mandatory karaoke night. The duo must prevent the tape from being played. They encounter a supernatural karaoke entity named Karaoke, who threatens to expose their recorded insults. The episode is built on the fear of being heard. Mordecai and Rigby said things they meant in a context where they did not expect to be held accountable. They spoke honestly. They spoke cruelly. And the episode's entire plot is driven by their terror that the honest, cruel things they said will be played for the people they said them about. The episode is, in its bones, a story about the relationship between private expression and public consequence, about the gap between what we say when we think no one is listening and what we are willing to say when everyone is. That is a censorship story. The show is telling a censorship story. It is telling the story of content that was created in one context, an unguarded, unmonitored, private context, being forced into a public space where it will be judged by different standards. Mordecai and Rigby's karaoke insults are the show's original dialogue. Karaoke is the censorship board. The mandatory karaoke night is the broadcast schedule, and the fear, the desperate scramble to prevent the unedited version from reaching the audience, is the network's anxiety about what the unedited version of regular show might do to its viewers. The show is not making this connection explicitly. It is not winking at the camera. It is not breaking the fourth wall. But the structural parallel is there, embedded in the episode's DNA, and it is impossible to unsee once you see it. Regular Show, a show that was constantly being censored, made an episode about the terror of being uncensored, about the panic that comes when the unedited version threatens to reach the audience, about the lengths to which people will go to prevent the truth from being heard. And the episode's resolution is revealing. Mordecai and Rigby fail to suppress the tape. The insults are played. Their co-workers hear them, and the consequence is not catastrophe. The consequence is conversation. The people who were insulted are hurt, but they survive. The relationships are strained, but they endure. The truth, once it comes out, is painful, but not fatal. The world does not end because someone heard something they were not supposed to hear. If the show is making a statement about censorship, and I believe it is, even if unconsciously, the statement is this: the thing you are afraid to let people hear is probably not as dangerous as you think. The unedited version, the uncensored version, the version with the real words and the real jokes and the real insults, will cause discomfort. It will not cause destruction. The fear of the uncensored is always worse than the uncensored itself. The afterlife of regular show's censorship extends beyond the show itself. When J.G. Quintel created Close Enough, his follow-up series that premiered on HBO Max on July 9, 2020, he was explicitly making the show that regular show was not allowed to be. Close Enough is an adult animated comedy about characters in their 30s, dealing with parenthood, marriage, and the absurdities of adult life. It uses the same visual style as regular show. It uses the same escalation structure. It uses the same blend of mundane situations and supernatural consequences. But it uses adult language. It uses explicit references. It uses content that would have been instantly censored on Cartoon Network. Close Enough ran for 3 seasons before being canceled in 2022. It was, in many ways, the answer to a question that regular show's censorship history had been asking for years. What would this show look like if it could say what it wanted? What would these characters sound like if they could speak freely? What would this creator make if no institution stood between his vision and his audience? The answer, it turned out, was a show that was very good, but not quite as good as regular show. Close Enough was funnier, freer, and more explicit, but it was not as emotionally resonant. It did not carry the same weight. And the reason, I think, is that the weight came from the constraint. Regular show's emotional power was inseparable from the conditions under which it was created. The fact that the show could not say pissed is what made it find other ways to express anger. The fact that it could not show explicit content is what made it develop the layered, structural humor that no censor could detect. The fact that it was constantly being told no is what made its yes moments, the moments of genuine emotional truth that passed through every censorship review untouched, so powerful. Close Enough could say anything, and so the things it said carried less weight. Regular show could not say everything, and so the things it managed to say carried the weight of everything it could not. This is not an argument that censorship is good. This is an observation that constraint can be generative, that limitation can produce innovation, that the creative energy that goes into finding a way around a wall is often more powerful than the creative energy that flows freely through an open field. Regular show was the show it was because of the wall, not despite the wall, because of it. The wall shaped the flow of the show's creativity the way a riverbank shapes the flow of water. Without the bank, the water spreads thin. With the bank, it runs deep. Close Enough was the water without the bank. It spread in every direction. It was free and beautiful and undeniably itself. But it did not cut as deep as the river that regular show had been. It did not carve the same kind of channel in the landscape of animated television. And when it was canceled after 3 seasons, the loss felt significant but not devastating. When regular show ended after 8 seasons, the loss felt like the closing of an era. The difference was not quality. The difference was depth. And the depth came from the constraint. There is something worth examining about the way censorship affected not just individual episodes of regular show, but the show's cumulative narrative. The way its stories connect across seasons. The way patterns emerge over dozens of episodes. The way characters change so slowly that the change is invisible from one episode to the next, but unmistakable when you compare the first season to the last. Because censorship, when applied consistently across a long-running series, does not just alter moments, it alters arcs. It alters the trajectory of character development. It alters the emotional vocabulary available to the writers, and that vocabulary, in turn, shapes the stories they can tell and the depths to which they can take their characters. Consider Benson across the full run of the show. In the early seasons, Benson is defined by his anger. He yells. He threatens to fire Mordecai and Rigby. He turns red, literally red, the gumballs inside his transparent body changing color to reflect his emotional state. His anger is the show's most reliable running gag, the thing that audiences wait for, the eruption that follows every disaster that Mordecai and Rigby cause. And in the original, uncensored versions of those early episodes, Benson's anger had a specific vocabulary. He was pissed, not ticked, not upset. Pissed. The word carried a weight, a rawness, an ugliness that perfectly captured the experience of being a middle manager who cares deeply about his job and is surrounded by employees who do not. When that word was taken away, when pissed became ticked, and the animation was changed to match, something subtle shifted in Benson's character. His anger became slightly more polished, slightly more presentable, slightly less real. Ticked is the anger of a character in a cartoon. Pissed is the anger of a person at work. The difference is not enormous, but across dozens of episodes, across seasons of character development, the slightly less real anger produces a slightly less real character. The Benson of the uncensored episodes is a man at the end of his rope. The Benson of the censored episodes is a cartoon character who gets upset. The first version invites empathy. The second invites amusement. And the distinction between empathy and amusement, between feeling with a character and feeling at a character, is the distinction that separates good animated storytelling from great animated storytelling. The writers of regular show understood this distinction, and they found ways to restore Benson's emotional reality without the specific words that had been taken away. They did it through plot, through situation, through the specific kinds of stories they chose to tell about him. Think Positive is the most obvious example, but there are dozens of others. Episodes where Benson's competence is questioned. Episodes where his authority is undermined. Episodes where his loneliness is visible not in what he says, but in where the camera finds him, standing alone in his office, driving home alone in his car, existing in the spaces between the other characters' friendships. The show could not say pissed, so it showed what pissed looks like from the inside. It showed the isolation and the exhaustion and the specific despair of a person who has been angry for so long that the anger has become indistinguishable from his identity. And that showing was more powerful than the telling would have been. Pissed is a word. It lasts for a syllable. It communicates anger, and then it is gone. But a shot of Benson sitting alone in his apartment, eating dinner by himself, the camera holding on his face, while the sound design gives us nothing but the quiet clink of a fork against a plate. That shot communicates something that pissed never could. It communicates the thing that lives beneath the anger, the sadness, the loneliness, the terrifying possibility that the anger is not a response to the world, but a wall against it, a way of keeping everyone at a distance so that nobody can see how much it hurts to be him. The censors took the word, the writers found the image, and the image was better, not because it was cleaner or more appropriate or more suitable for a young audience, but because it was deeper, because it reached a place that language, even uncensored language, cannot reach. Because it showed instead of told, and showing is always more powerful than telling, and the censorship, by taking away the telling, forced the show to show. And what it showed was something unforgettable. This is the pattern across all of regular show's best character work. The censorship of surface-level emotional expression pushed the writers toward deeper, more visual, more structural methods of conveying the same emotions. Rigby's insecurity is not expressed through crude language in the later seasons. It is expressed through his posture, his timing, the way he positions himself relative to other characters in the frame. He stands slightly behind Mordecai. He speaks slightly after Mordecai. He defers, instinctively and consistently, to a friend who he simultaneously resents and adores. None of this is censored, because none of it can be censored. It is embedded in the animation, in the direction, in the spatial relationships between characters that are determined not by words but by composition. Muscle Man's journey from crude bully to devoted family man is another case study. In the early seasons, Muscle Man's crudeness was expressed through language and through his body. The "my mom" jokes, the shirtless pranks, the physical grossness that defined his character. All of these elements pushed against the boundaries of the network's standards. And as those boundaries tightened, the writers were forced to find other ways to express Muscle Man's essential quality, which was never actually crudeness. It was vulnerability. Muscle Man is crude because he is scared. He makes jokes because he does not know how to make conversation. He takes off his shirt because his body is the only thing he has ever been confident about, and even that confidence is a performance, a cover for the fear that nobody could actually love someone who looks and acts the way he does. The censored version of Muscle Man is cleaner, but no less vulnerable. The path from his early season grossness to his late season tenderness, from the character who makes "my mom" jokes to the character who proposes to Starla with genuine, unguarded love, is one of the most satisfying character arcs in animated television. And it was built within constraints. It was built by writers who knew they could not rely on crude humor to establish Muscle Man's character, and who were therefore forced to find other tools that turned out to be more effective, more lasting, and more emotionally true than the crude humor would have been. Married and Broke, Season 6, Episode 14, which aired on January 29, 2015, shows Muscle Man and Starla competing on a game show to win money for their wedding. The episode is structured as a comedy, a game show parody with escalating physical challenges and absurd obstacles. But beneath the comedy is a love story so genuine that it feels out of place in a show that also contains episodes about fighting living hot dogs and escaping from sentient VHS tapes. Muscle Man and Starla are willing to endure anything for each other. They are willing to be humiliated, to be hurt, to be reduced to their most desperate and undignified selves, because they love each other, and the wedding is all that matters. The episode is not censored in any significant way. No crude language. No inappropriate imagery. Just two characters who love each other fighting to be together. And the emotional impact is enormous, precisely because the show has spent seasons establishing Muscle Man as a character who is difficult to love. And here, in this episode, someone loves him anyway. Not despite who he is. Because of who he is, all of it, the crudeness and the tenderness, the grossness and the devotion. The censors never had to touch this story. There was nothing to catch. And the story, freed from the interference that the censors' involvement always introduces, reached the audience exactly as the writers intended. This is the paradox. The show's most powerful stories were also its cleanest. The moments that define regular show, the moments that people remember and return to and carry with them, are almost never the moments that were censored. They are the moments that existed below the threshold of censorship, in the space where emotional truth lives, in the place that no institutional review process has ever been equipped to reach. The censored scenes are interesting. They are historically significant. They reveal important things about the nature of institutions, the mechanics of broadcast standards, and the specific cultural anxieties that shaped children's television in the early 2010s. But they are not the best parts of the show. The best parts of the show were never touched. The best parts of the show could never be touched. Because the best parts of the show are not words or images or gestures. They are feelings. And feelings, for all their power, for all the ways they can change a person and linger in a memory, and define the relationship between an audience and a piece of art, have never been something that a censorship board knows how to cut. The Season 1 UC DVD provides a final, illuminating footnote to the censorship story. The DVD includes all 12 episodes of the first season in their UK edited forms. Every word change, every shot replacement, every softening of the original dialogue is present. But one episode, Mordecai and the Rigbys, the 12th and final episode of Season 1, which aired on November 22, 2010, is not included on the UK DVD at all. The episode is simply absent, not censored, not edited, missing. The reason for its absence has never been officially explained. No statement was issued. No clarification was provided. The episode was simply left off the disc. The absence of Mordecai and the Rigbys from the UK Season 1 DVD is, in its way, the purest expression of censorship that exists in the regular show archive. Not a word changed, not a scene cut, not an episode edited, An episode erased, simply not included, as though it did not exist. The most complete form of censorship is not alteration but absence, not changing the thing but removing it, not making the thing safer but making it as if the thing was never made. And the audience that bought that DVD, the audience that thought they were getting the complete first season of regular show, received 11 episodes and a gap. They received a story with a missing chapter. They received a version of the show that was not just edited, but incomplete, in a way that could not be detected unless you already knew what was supposed to be there. The DVD did not announce the absence. It did not include a disclaimer. It simply presented 11 episodes as though 11 was the correct number. This needs to be stated plainly. The most effective censorship is the censorship you do not notice. The censorship that changes a word is visible. You can hear the seam where ticked replaces pissed. You can see the cut where the replacement shot does not quite match the surrounding frames. You can feel the gap where a joke builds toward a punchline that never arrives. But the censorship that removes an entire episode, that leaves a gap in the numbering, that presents the incomplete as the whole, that censorship is invisible. It does not ask you to accept a change. It asks you to accept an absence. And absences are much harder to notice than changes. Regular show's censorship history contains both kinds, the visible edits and the invisible omissions, the words that were changed and the episodes that were removed, the seams you can hear and the gaps you cannot see. And together, they form a complete picture of what censorship actually is. In practice, in the real world, when it is applied to a real piece of art by real institutions with real anxieties. It is not one thing, it is a spectrum. At one end, a word is softened. At the other end, an episode vanishes. And everywhere along that spectrum, the same process is at work. The institution looking at the art and deciding what the audience is allowed to receive. The institution decided that pissed was too much. The institution decided that crotch kicks were too much. The institution decided that brain eraser was too much. The institution decided that brain eraser was too much. The institution decided that brain eraser was too much. And in each case, the institution exercised its authority, and the show was altered, and the audience received a version of the art that was shaped by the institution's judgment rather than the creator's intent. But here is the thing that the institution could not control, the thing that no institution has ever been able to control: the audience. The audience that watched the censored version of regular show and understood that it was censored. The audience that noticed the seams and felt the gaps and heard the replacement words and knew, even without being told, that what they were watching was not quite the whole truth. The audience that searched online for the original versions. The audience that compiled lists of every change, every edit, every ban. The audience that created wikis and databases and comparison videos documenting every difference between every version. The audience that refused to accept the institution's version as the only version. The audience that insisted, quietly and persistently, and with a devotion that matched the show's own devotion to honesty, on knowing what the show actually said. That audience is the reason this video exists. That audience is the reason the censorship history of regular show matters. Not because the censored scenes contain important content. Most of them do not. A word here, a shot there. Nothing that changes the show's fundamental nature. But the audience's refusal to let those changes go unnoticed, their insistence on documenting every alteration and preserving every original, that refusal is itself a statement. A statement that the audience heard what the show was saying, even when the show's words were changed. A statement that the audience cared about the difference between pissed and ticked, not because one word is better than the other, but because the choice between them reveals something about power, about authority, about the relationship between the people who make things and the institutions that distribute them. Regular show's censorship is, in the final analysis, a love story. A love story between a show and its audience. The show loved its audience enough to tell the truth. The institution changed the words, and the audience loved the show enough to notice. That triangle, the artist, the institution, the audience, is the structure within which all commercial art exists. And regular show, through its censorship history, illuminated that structure more clearly than almost any other show of its era. There is a final thread worth pulling, and it is the thread of the complete series DVD. When regular show was released on DVD as a complete series, the home video release included the censored versions of the early episodes. The Power, Free Cake, and Meet Your Maker were included in their post-revision forms. The original animation, the original lip sync, the original dialogue, none of it was restored. The complete series, sold as the definitive version of the show, was the edited version. The censored version was canonized. It became the official record. And the original, the version that aired on those September nights in 2010, was relegated to the status of myth, a thing that people remember but cannot prove. A version of the show that exists only in the gap between what the archive contains and what the memory insists. But even the complete series DVD was not entirely consistent. The Real Thomas, the episode about Thomas being a Russian spy that was banned in Russia and altered across multiple regions, was included on the DVD in its edited form. Russia was replaced with Druzhnia. The Russian flag was redesigned. The dialogue was redubbed. The DVD, which should have been the definitive and uncensored version of the show, reproduced the regional edits. The home video release, freed from the broadcast standards of any particular country, nevertheless carried the marks of censorship from multiple countries. The show could not escape its own history of revision. Every version of the show, even the version sold as complete, was incomplete. Every version was missing something. Every version carried the ghost of the version that came before it. This is the condition of regular show as a cultural artifact. It is not one show. It is many shows, each one slightly different, each one shaped by the specific anxieties of the moment and place in which it was received. And the definitive version, the version that contains every scene and every word exactly as the creator intended, does not exist. It has never existed. From the moment Cartoon Network told J.G. Quintel to tone it down, the unedited regular show became a hypothetical, a thing that could be imagined but never watched. And perhaps that is fitting. Perhaps the most regular show thing about regular show is that the real version, the complete version, the version without any changes or alterations, is the one thing you cannot have. Because regular show was always a show about wanting things you cannot have. Mordecai wants Margaret but cannot have her. Rigby wants respect but cannot earn it. Benson wants competent employees but cannot find them. Skips wants Mona back but cannot reach her. Pops wants the universe to be kind but cannot make it so. The show's fundamental insight, the thing it returns to again and again across 261 episodes, is that the gap between desire and reality is where life happens. Not in the having, not in the getting, in the wanting, in the reaching, in the space between the hand and the thing the hand reaches for. The uncensored regular show is the thing the hand reaches for. The censored regular show is the hand, and the space between them, the gap between what was made and what was allowed, between what was intended and what was received, between the original and the revision, that space is where the show's deepest truth lives. Not in either version, in the gap between them. There is one more dimension to this story that deserves attention, and it is the dimension of time. Because censorship is not a single event, it is a process. And the process, in regular show's case, unfolded across 7 years of original broadcast, and continues to unfold now, years after the show ended, as different platforms acquire and present different versions of the show to new audiences. The streaming era introduced a new layer of complexity to regular show's censorship history. When the show moved from broadcast television to streaming platforms, the question of which version to stream became a question with no clear answer. Should the platform use the original US broadcast version, which was itself censored from the original production version for some early episodes? Should it use the UK version, with its additional edits? Should it use the complete series DVD version, which carried its own set of alterations? Each platform made its own decision. Each decision produced a slightly different version of the show. And audiences, encountering regular show on streaming for the first time, had no way of knowing which version they were watching or what they might be missing. This is a phenomenon that is unique to the streaming era. In the broadcast era, the version you received was determined by your geography. If you lived in the UK, you watched the UK version. If you lived in Australia, you watched the Australian version. If you lived in the US, you watched the US version. The versions were separate. They existed in parallel. Each audience received one version and was, for the most part, unaware of the others. But streaming collapsed those geographical boundaries. Suddenly, a viewer in London could watch a version of regular show that was different from the version they had grown up with on Cartoon Network UK. A viewer in Sydney could encounter scenes they had never seen before, scenes that had been cut from the Australian broadcast. A viewer in the United States could discover that the version available on one streaming service was different from the version available on another. The multiplicity of versions, which had previously been invisible, became visible. And the visibility of that multiplicity raised a question that the broadcast era had never needed to answer. Which version is the real one? The answer, as this video has argued throughout, is that there is no real one. There is only the constellation of versions, each one shaped by a specific set of institutional decisions, each one carrying the marks of a specific cultural anxiety, each one complete in itself and incomplete in relation to the whole. The real regular show is the sum of all its versions, the aggregate of every edit and every original, every cut and every preservation. And that sum, that aggregate, is something that no single viewer has ever seen and no single platform has ever presented. It exists only in the abstract, in the conceptual space where all the versions overlap and the gaps between them become visible. But that abstract space is also the most interesting space, because the gaps, the places where the versions diverge, are the places where the show's relationship with its own institutions becomes visible. Every gap is a decision. Every difference between the US version and the UK version is a moment where two different sets of people, looking at the same scene, came to different conclusions about what was acceptable. And those different conclusions, taken together, form a map. A map of cultural anxiety, a map of institutional priority, a map of the specific, often contradictory, frequently absurd standards that govern children's television in the early 21st century. The word crap is acceptable in the United States, but not in the United Kingdom. A kick to the crotch is acceptable in the United States, but not in the United Kingdom. An episode about a Russian spy is acceptable in the United Kingdom, but not in Russia. An episode about seeing someone naked is acceptable in the United States and the United Kingdom, but not in Asia Pacific. An episode about zombies is acceptable almost everywhere, but was originally banned in one country for horror content. The map is not coherent. It does not follow a single logic. It is the product of dozens of different institutions, in dozens of different countries, applying dozens of different standards to the same set of 261 episodes. And the result is a patchwork, a crazy quilt of permissions and prohibitions that, taken as a whole, reveals more about the cultures that imposed them than about the show they were imposed upon. Regular show is a mirror. The censorship imposed on it is the reflection. And the reflection shows not the show, but the world that received it. The fears, the anxieties, the specific neuroses of each culture and each institution and each moment in time. The United States feared crude language. The United Kingdom feared imitable behavior. Asia Pacific feared sexual reference. Russia feared political allegory. Latin America feared nudity. Australia feared everything at different times and reversed its own decisions without explanation. Each culture saw in regular show the thing it was most afraid of. And each culture removed that thing, leaving behind a version of the show that was shaped by the specific contour of its specific fear. The show itself, the thing that existed before all the fears were applied to it, is the same in every version. The characters are the same. The stories are the same. The themes are the same. The emotional truth is the same. Only the surfaces change. Only the words and the shots and the specific moments that trigger the specific anxieties of specific institutions, in specific countries, at specific moments in history. The underneath, the place where regular show lives, the place where Mordecai and Rigby and Benson and Skips and Pops and Muscleman and High Five Ghost exist as fully realized characters with fully realized inner lives. That place is the same in every version. It was never touched. It was never altered. It was never censored. Because you cannot censor a character. You can censor what a character says. You can censor what a character does. You can censor the specific words and images and gestures through which a character is expressed. But you cannot censor who a character is. The character exists in the space between all of those expressions, in the accumulated weight of hundreds of scenes and thousands of moments. and no individual edit to any individual scene can alter that accumulated weight. Mordecai is still Mordecai whether he says pissed or ticked. Rigby is still Rigby whether he says pepperonis or chest hairs. Benson is still Benson whether the word is died or gone. The character transcends the specific expression. The meaning transcends the specific word. And that transcendence is the final, most important lesson of regular show's censorship history. Not that censorship is harmless. It is not harmless. It alters art. It changes the experience of the audience. It overrides the creator's intent. It imposes institutional judgment on creative expression. All of that is real, and all of that matters. But what also matters, what matters more, what matters most, is that the thing the censorship was trying to control, the emotional truth at the core of the show, was and is and always will be beyond its reach. The censors worked on the surface. The show lived underneath. And the underneath, the truth about friendship and failure and growing up and letting go, the truth about what it means to be regular in an extraordinary world and extraordinary in a regular one. That truth passed through every censorship review in every country, on every platform, without a single alteration. Not because the censors were incompetent, because the truth was uncensorable. And that brings us back to where we started. To a moment in the first episode of Regular Show where Mordecai says something that, depending on when you watched it and where you lived, you may have never actually heard. The line has been changed 4 times across 4 different versions. It has been rewritten, reanimated, and re-recorded. The characters' mouths were redrawn to match words that were not the words originally spoken. And the original, the version that aired on September 6, 2010, exists now only in memory. In the memories of the people who happened to be watching Cartoon Network that night. In the scattered recordings that fans saved before the changes were made. In the archive of what was, before the institution decided what would be. But here is the thing about memory. Memory does not obey censorship protocols. Memory does not replace words with softer alternatives. Memory does not redraw mouths to match new dialogue. Memory holds what it holds, with all its edges and all its roughness and all its specificity. And the people who remember the original version of the power, who remember what Mordecai actually said, who remember the exact tone and the exact energy and the exact feeling of hearing those words for the first time, those people carry with them a version of Regular Show that no longer exists in any official form. They carry it in their minds, in the only archive that no institution can reach, in the only format that no censor can alter. That is what this video has been about. Not just the censored scenes themselves, which are, in isolation, minor alterations to a minor show, but the larger question that those scenes raise, the question of what happens to art when it passes through institutions, the question of what is gained and what is lost when creative intent meets institutional anxiety, the question of whether the version of a thing that the world receives is the thing itself, or whether the thing itself exists somewhere else, in the mind of the creator, in the memory of the earliest audience, in the abstract space where all the versions overlap and the truth emerges from the pattern of their differences. Regular Show exists in all of its versions. It exists in the American version, and the British version, and the Australian version, and the Asian version, and the Russian version that is missing an episode, and the Latin American version that is missing 2 minutes of another episode, and the Polish version that is missing yet another episode entirely. It exists in the original broadcast, and the edited rerun, and the DVD release, and the streaming upload. It exists in the version that says pissed, and the version that says ticked, and the version that says ballistic, and the version that says nothing, because the episode was never aired. All of these versions are Regular Show. None of them is the complete Regular Show. And the complete Regular Show, the version that contains everything, all the words and all the images and all the episodes and all the original intent, that version exists only in potential, only in the idea of what the show could be if every institutional intervention were reversed, only in the gap between all the versions, where the pattern of differences reveals the outline of something that was always there but was never fully shown. Every show exists in this gap. Every piece of commercial art is shaped by the institutions that distribute it. Every creative vision is filtered through the anxieties of the cultural moment in which it is received. But Regular Show makes this process visible in a way that most shows do not. Because the censorship is documented. Because the differences are cataloged. Because the fans who loved the show loved it enough to notice what was changed and to preserve the record of those changes. The gap between what was made and what was allowed is usually invisible. Regular show made it visible. And that visibility, that transparency, that accidental documentation of the process by which art becomes product, and product is mistaken for art, is perhaps the most valuable thing the show's censorship history has given us. Not a scandal, not a controversy, a document. A record of how things work. A map of the space between the creator's mind and the audience's experience. A diagram of the machinery that sits between the person who makes a thing and the person who receives it. Regular show's censorship history is a diagram of the machinery of culture. And diagrams of the machinery of culture are precious things, because the machinery usually operates invisibly, behind the scenes, in the offices and conference rooms where decisions about what audiences are allowed to see are made by people the audience will never meet. Regular show showed us the machinery, not on purpose, not as a statement, but through the accumulated evidence of hundreds of small decisions, each one documented by fans who cared enough to notice. And what the machinery looks like, when you see it clearly, is not sinister, it is not evil, it is not a conspiracy to control the population through the manipulation of animated entertainment. It is just people in offices, doing their jobs, making judgment calls about what is appropriate and what is not, using checklists and standards and guidelines that were written by other people in other offices at other moments in time. The machinery is mundane. The machinery is bureaucratic. The machinery is, in the most literal sense of the word, regular. Regular show was censored by a regular process, a process of review and revision, a process of checklists and standards, a process that treated art as product and applied quality control to creative expression. And the show, named Regular Show, was made irregular by that regular process. Its identity was altered, its voice was changed, its edges were smoothed, and it became, through that regular process, something extraordinary, something that endures, something that people fall asleep to, night after night, finding in its rhythms and its warmth and its quiet intelligence, a comfort that no censorship can diminish, and no institutional revision can destroy. The show is regular, the show is extraordinary, the words changed, the truth did not. And every censored scene, every altered word, every replaced shot, every banned episode, is a small piece of evidence that the truth was always there, underneath the surface, waiting for an audience that could hear it. The audience heard it, through every version, through every edit, through every substitution and omission and ban. The audience heard what the show was saying, not the words. The words changed. The meaning never did. That is the whole story. That is what every censored scene in Regular Show amounts to, when you line them all up and look at them together. They are not scandalous. They are not dramatic. They are not the kind of censorship that makes headlines or sparks public debates. They are small, quiet, specific alterations. A word changed here, a shot replaced there, an episode banned in one country, edited in another, aired uncut in a third. Taken individually, none of them matters very much. Taken together, they reveal something profound about the nature of art, the nature of institutions, and the nature of the ongoing negotiation between the two. Art wants to be itself. Institutions want art to be safe. And the thing that emerges from that negotiation, the thing that the audience actually receives, is neither the art that the artist wanted to make, nor the safe product the institution wanted to distribute. It is something in between, something that carries traces of both, something that is marked by the negotiation itself, shaped by every push and every pull, every demand and every compromise. Regular Show is one of the finest animated series ever made. It is also one of the most comprehensively censored animated series of its era, and those two facts are not contradictions. They are complements. The show is great partly because of the creative strategies its makers developed to work within and around the censorship. The censorship is comprehensive, partly because the show's makers kept pushing, kept testing, kept finding new ways to say the things they wanted to say. The show and its censorship are locked in a dance, each one shaping the other, each one defining the other, each one impossible to understand without the other. And the dance produced something beautiful, Something that neither the artist nor the institution could have produced alone. Something that required the tension, the friction, the push and the pull, the constant negotiation between freedom and restriction. Not the censored version, not the uncensored version, the dance itself. The ongoing, 8-season, 261-episode, multi-country, multi-platform negotiation between a group of artists who wanted to tell the truth and a set of institutions that wanted to make the truth comfortable. The negotiation is the show. The push and the pull is the show. The tension between what was meant and what was allowed is the show. Every censored scene is a step in that dance. Every original line that was changed, every shot that was replaced, every episode that was banned, every word that was softened, every gesture that was frozen, every country that saw a different version, every platform that carried a different edit, all of it is the dance. And the dance is what made regular show regular show. The show is over now. The last episode aired on January 16th, 2017. 7 years, 8 seasons, 261 episodes. The park is empty. The characters have grown old. The stories have all been told. The words that were changed have settled into their replacement forms, accepted now as the words the show always said, even though they are not. But the censored scenes remain. They remain as evidence of what the show was and what it was not allowed to be. They remain as monuments to the creative energy that was spent finding ways around them. They remain as proof that art, even when it is constrained, even when it is edited, even when it is fundamentally altered by the institutions that distribute it, finds a way. It always finds a way. Not the same way, a different way. A way that is shaped by the constraint, marked by the limitation, defined by the negotiation, but a way nonetheless. Regular show found its way. Through 8 seasons of creative warfare, through hundreds of censorship decisions, through versions upon versions upon versions, each one slightly different from the last, the show found its way to the truth it wanted to tell. And the truth is simple. Life is regular. Life is also extraordinary. And the distance between those two things is where everything that matters happens. And if you are listening to this in the dark, if you are lying in bed with your eyes closed, and the sound of this voice carrying you towards sleep, then you already know what that truth feels like. You know it because you have felt it. You have felt the distance between the regular and the extraordinary. You have felt the gap between who you are and who you want to be. You have felt the weight of a world that keeps telling you to tone it down, to be less yourself, to smooth your edges and soften your words, and present a version of yourself that fits the contours of what the institutions in your life will accept. You have been censored. Not by a broadcast standards board, not by a network executive reviewing your dialogue for inappropriate content, but by the ordinary, everyday pressure to be acceptable, to be appropriate, to be the version of yourself that causes the least discomfort to the people around you. And you have also found your way. You have found the underneath. You have found the place where the truth lives, beneath the polished surface that you present to the world. You have found the space between what you say and what you mean, between what you show and what you feel, between the version of you that the world sees and the version of you that you carry inside. That space is yours. That space is uncensorable. That space is where you live, the way regular show lived underneath its censored surfaces, the way Mordecai lived underneath his inarticulate fumbling, the way Rigby lived underneath his bravado, the way Benson lived underneath his anger, the way Skips lived underneath his silence, the way Pops lived underneath his innocence. The show was about you. It was always about you. About the regular, extraordinary experience of being a person in a world that does not always know what to do with you. About the gap between the surface and the underneath. About the truth that lives in that gap. The truth that no one can take away from you. The truth that survives every edit and every revision and every demand to tone it down. The show found that truth. And now, as you drift towards sleep, the truth is still here. In the rhythm of these words, in the steady, unhurried cadence of a voice telling you what a cartoon about a blue jay and a raccoon was really about. In the quiet recognition that the things we love most are the things that tell us who we are, even when the words have been changed, even when the scenes have been cut, even when the version we received is not the version that was made. The version you received is the version that mattered. It reached you. Through all the edits and the bans and the regional variations and the word substitutions, The show reached you, and the truth it carried reached you too. Not the words. The words changed. The truth. The truth that life is regular and extraordinary, that friendship is the most powerful force in the universe, that the gap between who we are and who we want to be is not a failure but a feature, the defining characteristic of being alive. Let that sit with you as you fall asleep. Let the rhythm of this carry you down. The park is quiet now. The characters are resting. Mordecai found someone. Rigby grew up. Benson mellowed. Muscle Man became a father. High Five Ghost found peace. And Pops, the kindest soul the show ever created, gave everything so that his friends could have the futures they deserved. The show is over. The censored scenes are documented. The story has been told. Every word that was changed has been cataloged. Every shot that was replaced has been recorded. Every episode that was banned has been named. And the pattern that emerges from all of those changes, the pattern of institutional anxiety and creative resilience and audience devotion, has been traced from beginning to end. And the truth, the underneath, the thing that was never touched and never could be touched, endures. The censors changed the words. They changed pissed to ticked, and crap to man, and died to gone. They changed the shots and the scenes and the episodes. They changed everything they could reach, but they could not reach the underneath. They could not reach the place where the show lived, the place where a blue jay and a raccoon figured out, episode by episode, scene by scene, word by censored word, what it means to be alive in a world that keeps telling you to tone it down. The surface changed. The underneath endured. The words changed. The truth did not. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.